Hello, Internet. I must tell you, I'm excited. And I know all of you should start laughing when I say that, but really I am. I love my job. I love talking to people. What I find fascinating about the Rhodesians is the quality of men and the quality of their training. Because whenever I speak to any of their pilots, and I spoke to a few now, these people flew everything. It's like you got this solid basic training, and then you can just, man, if it's got wings or even rotor blades, I'm sure you can fly it. And we got one of them here, very special man, Steve Murray. I believe you ended up as a captain flying for Qantas. So, sir, you are very welcome here with us. And I also know, and I must tell you guys, this is. I've never said this before, but this guy actually owns his own fighter aircraft. He's got a Hawker Hunter, which he's the owner of. And we're going to talk about that thing too, because I believe next month he's going to fly with it. And of course, Legacy will want some videos. Let me warn you up front here, sir. So very welcome. Thank you for your time, sir. I appreciate it. Let me just say to the rest of you, I'm once again in a hotel room. I'm not even in Thailand now. I'm in Laos, Laos, amper sê ek Lagos, which is in Nigeria. I used to live there. Laos, strange place, communist country. You can see it. Not just the most friendly of places, to be honest. Very run down. Totally not what Thailand is. It's sad to say. But I did find something. I found a very nice knife. Got it
Oh,
here second.
really?
It's an actual knife. It's not a fake copy. That's the most amazing thing. The
Fair
Jungle
enough.
King one. I'm quite proud of it. I found it for $20. Anyway, enough about it. So tell me, where did it start for you? How did you end up in the Rhodesian Air Force?
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me on this. I appreciate it, and I've done a couple of these, and we talked about this before we came on air. And the fact is that I feel very strongly that we should be recording our history, even though it's 40 years ago. People are going to forget, and especially our children, our grandchildren, and their children. And if they Google, they're going to read about some strange people that lived in Rhodesia, bad guys, and it wasn't like that at all. So I feel very strongly that, and I appreciate what you guys are doing this in recording our history. From my point of view, I was my maternal people came to Africa in the 1830 settlers, some from Ireland, one from Germany. So we go back a long way, and so they can't have definitely not calling us Africans. But from my point of view, coming from the aviation side, I grew up in a big farm, a huge farm in this sort of eastern side of Rhodesia then. It was a 32,000 acre farm, which originally was 120,000 acres, and it was a farm given to this chap Fisher, or he bought it from Rhodes, and we grew up in the Sun farm, which is now 33,000 acres. And this was in the 50s, and we were having British aircraft flying out, bombers and fighters, and flying low over the farm. And something must have triggered in me at about 5 years old. Also, the farm owner had a little triplace, and he used to take my mum to town. And I was a little ankle biter there, and I'd obviously go. But one of the first words I ever said was upper, and the other one was ndegi, which was the African word for aeroplane. So that's where it all started, I suppose. And from then on, I was very interested. And I went to boarding school locally in Brandeis. It was school then. And then to high school, we moved into town. And in 1963, by now, I was really keen on aeroplanes. And early on, it was for the World War II Spitfire and the Mustang and that sort of thing. But the Hunters arrived in Rhodesia in 1963. And about the same time, I had a photograph I saw of a jet fighter, and they were flying along, the two of these guys together, and the one guy turned away like this. It was a Swedish one. And this guy was looking up at them and said, that's what I want to do. And so when these aircraft arrived in 1963, I was 15 years old. I said, I want to fly one of those. Unfortunately, my English, my education didn't match my enthusiasm. So I couldn't actually join as a pilot, but I was able to join as a technician. and I joined the Air Force in 1966 as an instrument fitter. But I only ever worked in the Hunter. I went straight from my training to work in the Hunter. And then I also worked in the Hunter simulator, where I got to fly this thing. It was a beast of a machine. The pilots hated it, but I eventually got to fly it quite well. That's because I played on the thing the whole time. And then after I'd finished in fact, I was a sergeant then, I think, and I kept on applying. It took me 3 goes to get on. The first time I was on reserve. The second time I broke my ankle. I couldn't go. And the third time I was accepted. And I went on to number 24 PDC in 1970. And I perhaps from all the Hunter flying and that sort of thing in the simulator, I actually did all right. The 3 of us were put up for the Sword of Honor at the end. From my education and my learning, I didn't get that one, but I got the Commander's Award, which was from the flying point of view. And my mate, Aboli, the 3 of us were put up. And straight after we'd done our weapons course on the Vampire, the initial training was on the Piston Provost, which is a British aircraft. And then we did the advanced training on the Vampire. And then we went straight from our wings onto OC, all of us went on to OCU, which was an operational conversion unit on the Vampire. And once again, we threw bombs and rockets and guns at the ground. And once again, somehow, I think it was from a couple of lucky bombs I had, I came on top of that one. And from there, a friend and I went straight to Hunters. Now, that wasn't supposed to happen in our Air Force because we didn't have 2-seater Hunters. And the Hunter coming from the Vampire is a huge jump because the Vampire, for me, the barely thing could barely get airborne half the time. But the Hunter now had this great acceleration and power and everything. And so most people who went to the Hunter went very experienced. So we got a huge shock. Now, again, that was my ambition to fly the Hunter. And here I was, 32 months after I finished being a technician, I was now going to Hunters, less than 2 years hence. So anyway, that's what happened. We went to the Hunter. And it was, to begin with, it was very interesting. And sorry, I should go back and qualify what I said earlier on. We all did the Vampire training, OCU. But you mentioned earlier on the fact that Rhodesians, we tended to fly everything. And we did. It was a small Air Force, and you spent a couple of years in one squadron, and they sent you somewhere else, another year in another squadron. So we basically eventually flew everything. In my particular case, I never got into any, I always wanted to fly fighters, and I also did some of the helicopters, which I'll come to. But anyway, we went to the Hunter, and we didn't know at the time why we had gone so junior. And it wasn't a popular choice by anyone because the guys with experience were expecting to come back. Everyone wanted to fly the Hunter. But as we'll find out later, there was a reason for it. And I'll sort of come to that a bit later. I also was qualified at this stage that I was never really keen on becoming anything military. And I think for 95% of pilots in the Air Forces, it's probably unlike the Army. If you're going to join the Army, you're going to be in the military, and that's it. You want to march around and do what you've got to do. With pilots, I'd say 95% just want to get and fly fast jet fighters, and that's certainly I was in that category. But as will become apparent, you obviously got to do your job if things change, because that was peacetime at that stage. Anyway, sorry, I was just wearing my I don't know, I got this from America, goodness, a Rhodesian Hunter, so I had to wear this for this exercise. But we're on the Hunter now, and it was a steep learning curve. The first flight on the Hunter for me was I was sitting way behind the tail somewhere, and somehow I got it back on the ground again. And after that, it turned out to be a lovely airplane to fly. Very, very light controls, beautiful lookout, beautiful looking. If you ever look at Hunters, you might have photographs I've sent you. It's a beautiful looking airplane. Everyone loves the Hunter. In fact, in Australia, when I was flying here with Qantas, Australians never had Hunters. But a lot of the guys that I flew with, we all love airplanes. You said one of the first models I made was one of a Hunter because it's such a beautiful looking airplane. And it flew like that. There's a saying that if it looks good, it flies well. And that for the Hunter, it certainly was true. And then So that was in 1972 is when I went on to the Hunter. And towards the end of that era, they started having incursions into the country, and some farmers were starting to be attacked, and so things started to hot up at that stage, and we started doing some sort of border strikes. Sort of against incursions, but at that stage we had one really big one. And that was the first big strike we had. And we went in there with 5 of us, took off in the dawn. And I remember, and I've written about it in my book, sitting there in this. In fact, as a matter of interest, the Hunter is only second to the Warthog, which is this American aircraft, which is an anti-tank aircraft. And it's got a Gatling gun, a 30 millimeter, I think it's a 20 millimeter Gatling gun, with a 15,000 round a minute firing rate. And that is a monster. They still use them. The Hunter is only second to that in firepower. The Hunter's got 4 30 millimeter cannon, 540 rounds, which you can blast off in 9 seconds. And here I was sitting in the dawn and sitting then at Salisbury with all these 4 hunters. I was number 4, and there were all these other hunters ahead of me and one behind me. This roar going on, and with rockets down the sides here, and full guns. And we went out, and we went in. The SAS had deployed during the night over the border, and there was supposed to be a huge camp there. And in the morning, as we got there bright and early, they mortared in. A Ford airfield controller dropped napalm to indicate the target, and then we went in. And it was quite an experience because the rockets did a lot of damage, but the guns, by the time I got number 4 and fired off my 540 rounds, which is 9 seconds, there was nothing left on the ground. It was quite an experience. Anyway, that was sort of our lead into our little bush war out there. And then shortly after that, out of the blue came this posting to Mirages in South Africa. And that's where the story from our perspective comes in. And there's not an awful lot known about why we went down there. And I've got quite a bit of account that I've actually spoken about this. And I certainly believe that, this is my belief, is that we went down there because the South Africans had a lot of different Mirages. I'm going to show you my picture of this beautiful looking aeroplane. I always like to bring this out. This is the Mirage 3CZ. And that is the one that Israelis did all the damage in the 1967 war, exactly that one. So that's the first Mirage that the South Africans got. Then they got a Mirage EZ, which looked very much like that, but it didn't have it had an extra fuel tank, and it had Doppler, and a bigger engine, and they moved it, increased the length by a couple of feet. It looked exactly the same. And now, those aircraft were now over 10 years old, or the CZ. So they wanted a new one, and they were looking around, and they eventually chose the Mirage F1, which they bought. And the way I figured it, and in fact, a lot of us figured it, I assume, is that we'll send all these bunch of Rhodesians down, and they can come in, the engineers can work on the aircraft, and they can fly them, but only the CZ. And that's what happened. They sent a couple of senior guys down first, and then at that stage, I think about 5 or 6 guys had gone down, but of varying ranks. And I was the little guy with the little stripe. I think I was still a second lieutenant there, what we call a air sub lieutenant. And we went down and joined all these heavies, you know. And it was just to give us the depth in the, I think the depth to win. So if we took them back, that's how we'd be. We'd have a fairly depth in the squadron. But it was, I suppose now, if I didn't think back, it should have been quite intimidating, because on the squadron, this is number 2 Squadron Cheetahs. That is their premier squadron, and at that time it was their premier aircraft as well, because they had the CZs and the EZs on the same one. And so now I'm sitting here with on the squadron was the commandant. There would have been about, I think, at least 6 majors, captains uncountable. And then me. That was it. Even the chap I went down with, he was a captain as well, and I trained with him. So it was a very steep learning curve for me. And it turns out, and I guess I'm just, if I thought back in it, and I listen to people talk now, it's not an easy airplane to fly, and especially with minimum of experience. I only at that stage on the Hunter, I only had about 500 hours. Total hours would have been on, but not beyond 600, I don't think. So with not much great experience. And I remember training a chap when I was in QANTAS, and I was training as a captain, I think. And anyway, when we talking, as we always do, about fighters, he said he started training on the Mirage in Australia. And after a couple of flights, he said, I'm not doing this. It's too hard. So as it turned out, I spent 3 years there, and it was very interesting flying. Once again, I come back to the fact is I wasn't there to be a military man. I just wanted to fly these fast jets. And in South Africa, it was at peace, and there wasn't an awful lot of flying going on. Pilots, they all became generals, and 2 of them became chief of the Air Force. I think they were doing other things. So we had lots of time to do other sort of flying. And one of the things the guys hated on 2 Squadron, on the Mirages, was test flying. And anyway, because I was a junior guy, as soon as I finished my training, I said, come on, you've got to come and do some test flying. And we would go from Waterkloof across to Jan Smuts, where they had Denel, what there was called Atlas. And we did this test flying. Now, the sort of buckets of money they had, the facility was amazing. In Hunters, we used to have to write everything on our pads when we did test flying. Here we arrived there, they got this great big tower with all the engineers sitting there with great big computers everything in front of them. And we'd go out to the aircraft, and one of these things, without any tanks on, without radar on the front, brand new. They've been painted. When they go through servicing, all painted brand new again. And I walked out of this aircraft, jumped in, of course, now with no tanks on, with no radar. It went. So I went to my air test. I'm flying up now, and all they want to do is to read out these readings on the dial. So I did that. I read them out. Leveled off at about 35,000 feet. Then I had to accelerate to 1.6, Mach 1.6, because once you go supersonic, the airflow into the engine has to be steady and smooth. And they've got little, what we call mice, the little things come out on the side of in front of the engine to take the shock wave off the engine intake. And that's what we want. 1.6. When that was over, went back and landed, and I still had half a tank of fuel. So I said to the engineers, I went up there and I said, I've got half a tank of fuel down there. If I do this again, is there any chance I can use that and go and play? So they looked at me very strangely, and they said, sure. So anyway, I went away with this bloke. I'd gone there. His name was Skelly Hartog. He ended up a general in the Air Force, lovely guy. But when he got back, because he was the adjutant of the squadron, and I was the adjutant of the Rhodesians. And he said to me, listen, Steve, I'm sorry, but that aircraft that you flew, it has got a couple of problems. You're going to have to go back tomorrow. So I said, oh, no, I don't have to, do I? Because I've got to look miserable like the rest of them. And he said, no, I'm afraid you've got to go. So I rushed back there, jumped into this Mirage, did my air test. I still had half a tank of fuel, so I just went to play. And it was some of the best fun I ever had in my life. I really did. It was amazing. I had another one, which I'm going to tell you the story. I took up a 2-seater. Now, our 2-seaters for this aircraft was a pure trainer. Later on, they had, like the later Mirage 2-seaters had guns and all that sort of stuff. But the ones we flew with, called a BZ, it looked exactly the same, but it was lighter than the single-seater. We couldn't take a passenger on the air test. So it was wonderful. So anyway, I taxied out I was doing this air test on this 2-seater. I taxied out, and I was sitting on the runway. At that stage, it's now a taxiway. It used to be a cross runway, right across the main runway at Smuts. And as I come to the hold there, I'm waiting, and I see a DC-10 coming to land, a UAT. And anyway, the guy landed, and when he went off the runway, the tower said to him, you're going to have to hold there because there's a Mirage taking off in front of you. So I said, oh, this will be interesting. Now, here's a Frenchman, because UTA was a French airline. I said, here's a Frenchman. I want to show him how his jet can fly. So I went full power, not into afterburner yet. And then once you release the brakes, you go into afterburner. But it was so light, the whole thing was starting to move. And I let the brakes go, went full afterburner, and I was airborne down halfway down the runway, and I went past him at 300 knots, just off, and then I just went straight up. And I don't know what he said because he was on another frequency there. I'd love to have heard. But the fact remains, I was now going screaming up now. I was given my departure clearance, and it all went quiet. I'm over Joburg now, and I'm going supersonic. I looked down. Now that's a real problem because if you go supersonic low level, things start breaking, and even things haven't broken, they still say that it was your fault. So now, unfortunately, I was climbing steeply, but I thought I just landed off that flight. I thought, this is my job. I'm finished now. So I landed. Nothing transpired of it, but it was a bit of a flight. But that's the sort of fun we were having. And going back to the Rhodesia story as well, at one stage, why I think what I say is true is we had to go. Another Rhodesian pilot, myself, took 2 Mirages down to Langebaan in the Cape, and we went to do trials with radar tracking guns, which was another story in itself. But all our technicians were all Rhodesians, and there was a sort of indication to us, let's see how these guys operate on their own type of thing. And that's why I thought that's what we were doing there. And but then politics changed. 1976, I think that the story was the South African government had to borrow some money from the World Bank, and Forster was in power, and they just said to him, shut Rhodesia down. And we were told that. We were told in 1976 in Cape Town, in the Cape, that one of our senior bosses came and said, listen, things aren't looking too good for us. Anyway, by that stage, it was end of 76, and a slot came up. As I said, we flew everything. A slot came up to fly helicopters back in the war. A couple of my mates had been killed by that stage, and here I was sitting in South Africa having a wonderful time flying jet fighters. Anyway, so I went back I did my training on choppers in Cape Town because the war was really hotting up, and the South Africans put us on some of their courses. And I did my training at Astor Plant for 6 months. I love the Cape. I love Cape Town. It was just wonderful flying there. And the weather was generally really good. The mountain was always there, down the beach and all that sort of stuff. I must admit, I didn't find the helicopter all that easy to fly initially. In fact, I used to hate seagulls because they hovered so well, and I couldn't hover very well. So I didn't enjoy the chopper to begin with. But once I realized that you got the versatility of it, flying over the mountain, the Table Mountain, in the chopper. Also, one day, just after I'd gone solo, I was flying down the beach and just north of Bloberg Strand, and there was a girl walking her dog down the beach. So I thought this should be. So I went down. She's obviously used to it. And I went down and hovered just near her, and I waved at her, and she waved back, and I thought, this is going to be fun. So, anyway, that was good. Then we went up to did our mountain flying in the Drakensberg, which is another lovely spot to do flying. And it's also, once again, a steep learning curve because flying on those mountains with that wind up there, and that's why we did it. That's why we trained a lot with mountain flying in the winds. And we had lots of fun up there. And from there, it was into the Bush War. We went back, we did a little bit of training, and then we started, the first Bush tour. Now, what was the 3 of us who'd come back? 2 of us from Mirages, and one had been a Canberra pilot. And we went. Once we'd done our basic training, just a sort of Rhodesian conversion, they sent the 3 of us off together to Motoko. This is a place in the northeast where the war was fairly hot. And as we landed in the Dakota, we walked to our aircraft, introduced ourselves to the pilots who they just wanted to pack up and go. Anyway, the gunship pilot, the K-car pilot, he came down and he said, with a big smile on his face, because he saw us with jet jockeys. I mean, they used to call us miracle pilots, or we're probably a lot worse than that. Anyway, he said, I'm just delighted to tell you that we're just going to go and brief now to take the SAS over the border. So, yeah, we are, first day in the bush, just landed, looking for where we're going to stay and where we're going to put our kit and everything. And off we were, we were briefed. And then that was the next big shock for me because in the Alouette helicopter we were flying, it's derated, and the way you work out your power, there's a little computer that works out the pressure, altitude against temperature, and gives you a sort of an indication on the maximum power you can pull. And that was no problem. And we were taking SAS. So we normally had 4 troops. That's what you expected to have. And I had 3 troops on board, but I didn't realize the weight of the Bergens because they used to go over for a couple of weeks over the border. And anyway, I thought, 3 troops, that's all right, a bit heavy, but we'll be right. So we started taxiing off, and the Alouette's got wheels, so we could taxi out onto the runway. The gunship pilot, the K car, he took off. The lead trooper, I was number 2, he took off, second in the air. Now I'm there now, and with the wheels, there's an advantage in the helicopter because you have something. When you hover in the helicopter, there's a lot of power required. But once you start moving forward, and the airflow comes over the top of the blades, it's called transition, and you get translational lift. So now all that bad stuff that was causing you to in the hover goes away, and you get more power. So the big advantage of running off the runway, running down the runway, is you can go through that transition without having to hover. Anyway, I was happy to do that, running down the runway, pulled my power. I got to maximum power, and all that happened, I'd come on my nose wheel. I'm still on the ground. So I see these other 2 guys, and I said, how can they be flying it? I'm not flying it. So I just kept on pulling. And eventually we got airborne. As it turned out, the Alouette is like, if you think of a normal helicopter, it's like a Fiat 500. And you think of the Alouette helicopter, it was a Jeep, you know. And we flew, we landed up and went across the border. As we crossed the border, we get shot at. So this is my first experience. So I look at my engineer, he doesn't look too concerned at all. You know, I hear this over there, and the K car said, we've been fired at from the right. And I looked at him, he said, lone gook, don't worry about it. Meanwhile, I was in the trees there. But that was once again first experience. They apparently gave the Mozambicans gave all the locals AK-47s, and if they heard a helicopter, they just started firing. So that was the next thing. We dropped the troops off the SAS, and they did the thing. We made back and took a whole lot more. But it was interesting. It was that was my first experience in the bush. And then 2 days later, we had another one. We had the Fire Force, which I don't know if anyone's ever talked much about the Fire Force to you guys. We've interviewed much about the Fire Force. Do you want to talk about it at all? A bit of information? Okay, now, once again, I have to qualify the fact that I spent a lot of my time in the Air Force flying jet fighters in South Africa, and then I went on to instruction. So I haven't got the experience that a lot of the guys you'll speak to. I mean, bush time experience. Some of my friends did 5 years on helicopters. I'm not sure helicopters, and I was lucky if I probably did a total of 2 between instructing that type of thing. So I've not got the experience these guys, other guys have got. And I'm not trying to push my little war stories to you. But this particular one was good. This is within a couple of days of driving in the bush. We had a very successful Fire Force. And the way the Fire Force worked in Rhodesia, and it worked very well, very, very well. We had 4 helicopters. One was a gunship, and once again it was Alouette because of sanctions we couldn't get in. And all they did was put a 20mm cannon out the side of it. And in the gunship sat the most qualified pilot. I was not to say senior pilot because in the case I spoke about just now, we were all senior to him, but he was the most qualified pilot. Next to him sat the army commander, and he was facing the wrong way because he was looking down to see where the action was. And behind the pilot sat the engineer gunner, and the gun sat right across the cockpit with this 20mm cannon. And then the other 3 helicopters were troopers. We call them G cars. The K car, I assume, was a killer car. I don't know. The G car were the troopers, and we each had 4 troops on board, and the gunner had at the end we had twin Brownings. 3 Brownings, machine guns, which were fairly useless, but the sort of height we were flying. So that was the basic Fire Force. And then we had a push-pull Cessna 336, which was everything the Rhodesians bought. We put guns and missiles and napalm all over it. So this poor thing with 2 engines had guns on top, rockets behind, but his whole object was sit above the action. And he could be a radio transmitter for us, or we could the K car, the gunship pilot, could use them to fire on to mark the targets. And then also we had a DC-3, the Dakota, and they had 26 troops. I think it was 26 troops on board. And those troops could be dropped in to increase our firepower on the ground. And they would drop from 500 feet, which, yeah, 500 feet. Anyway, so now we've got this whole lot. And also we've got what we call a land tail. All the troops we basically use, and the best with RLI, Rhodesian Light Infantry, and they were Rambo. They wore shorts, T-shirts with camouflage. Plus, Jenny, the bloke with the machine gunner, had bandolier across there. They had sweatbands, and they wore the Veldschoens. So we call them in Australia Sahara boots. And that's it. That's all they wore. And they were amazing troops. And they had the language of their own as well. They were sort of, they all spoke with this proper, I can't do it. But anyway, they were amazing troops. In fact, I heard recently they were probably the most successful troops in history because the kill ratio was outstanding. Backed up by us, of course, and the helicopters. But so now we've got the aircraft, and now we've got the troops, and we would then wait for a call out. The call outs generally came from an OP. Rhodesia, like South Africa, has got these great big granite monoliths, huge hills, they're all over the place. And the guys would sit on top of these and watch in the tribal trust lands where these terrorist insurgents moved, and they would watch for them. And invariably, they weren't really keen on fighting. They were generally conscripted from mission stations, kidnapped, if you want to call it that. They were then, obviously, some were very keen to do it themselves. But when they came back, they were quite happy, quite often, just to sit and have a parties. And that's what we'd wait for them, to have a party. And the OP be watching them. And then the next thing would happen when the party was good and strong, and they would generally walk in a river line or something like that under trees, and then we would get a call out, and then they would pick a specific area, so we wouldn't have to fly more than about 10 minutes. With that call out, we knew the area fairly well. The gunship pilot would speak to the army commander and describe on the ground what they might do. Once he got airborne, we'd all fly off behind him. Once they came to the target, they would pull up. The gunship pilot would pull up to about 600 feet and fly at 80 knots, and he would start orbiting. And then the OP would say, okay, you're in the right position, and the gunner would throw out a smoke. And depending on where that smoke fell, he would say, okay, the terrorists are either there, or they were firing at us at that stage. The troopers would then go around the base of the area in a sort of a 120-degree position, about a K or 2 Ks away from where the action, if it was going. In our particular case, this very first one, these guys opened up straight away. Boom. So we knew where they were. And we were going around. Once again, never been in action before. All of a sudden, I could see smoke and all sorts of other stuff flying up here. Anyway, very quickly, they stopped firing because the gunship had put down the cannon fire. And then the troops then were to be put down. And that's where the army commander came in. He would say, I want my troops on that river line, and that river line. And we would get talked around onto an area where we could drop our troops. This case, I wasn't in the gunship. I went to the gunship shortly afterwards. But I was in a trooper at that stage. And this is when I nearly got shot down. This was my fault. He took me into this great big hill was here, this huge great granite hill. And I knew where the terrorists were because you could actually see where there'd been smoke. So I came and dropped my troops, and he said, when you pull out, turn immediately hard left and get out of there. So I landed, woof, fine, and the troops are amazing. All right. The problem with the chopper, if you come down too heavily and you have to pull too much power, they have something called boarding string, but we won't talk about that here. But it's actually unstable on the aircraft. But as you come near to the ground with these troops, as you start to pull up power, they just jump out. And they've got to jump out together, because if one jumps out this side and not that side, the whole chopper starts doing that. They were out and gone. So I just pulled the power and I turned. And the hill was like, yeah, I didn't even think about that. I just drove around the front. Oh, and the next minute, pop, 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 pop. I reckon in 5 seconds, I was only about 10 meters above the trees. And it went on and on. And my poor old engineer, he was, and I had my feet up and swearing at them. Anyway, we got away, and I said, we had to be shot down. And my old John, who was in the K-car, I said, you've gone the wrong way around. Anyway, I said, it's all over now. I've got to go in and see what's happened to this helicopter. And it was, they'd missed completely, because they just were, I assume, firing like this. Anyway, we landed there, refueled, and waited, and then all the other troops came on the trucks. But every now and again, because of what had happened to me, they were firing back, and obviously these guys they were still doing quite well. So they called me back. I had picked up the KCAR, the army commander, and flew around with him for a while the KCAR went and refueled, and he came back, picked up the army commander. All our troops had been dropped now, but these guys were still fighting. They were still shooting. So they went to drop the Dakota and with all these troops. And that all that happens, you just set up the altimeter, which and that then gives him his 500-foot height, and then drop it. As the parachutes come out, the parachute, boom, land. And once they dropped it 300 feet, I don't know how the guys survived that. Very few casualties. They all get in the line, and then the sweep starts. And they were still firing. So now the KCAR chappie decided that it's not good enough to send troops in there. There seem to be quite a few of them there. So called the Jetson. Now that's the other thing I haven't mentioned. There are 2 hunters or 2 cameras sitting on standby, or 1 camera sitting on standby, either in Thornhill or in Salisbury. In this case, they call the Canberra. So now all the action for us done. The troops are on the ground. We've got a line. We've got a sweep line ready to go. We've got stops on either side on the other rivers. So we went and sit on top of the hill because they've got these great big hills. We had a brew, a cup of tea, waiting while the gunship's going around here. All the troops are waiting, and here comes the Canberra. So first thing of all, the gunship guy gets the Lynx, which was the push-pull aircraft, to drop napalm to show where the target was. And once he can see that the bomb aimer on the Canberra can come and drop the bombs. And he came past, you can hear the bomb doors open, all these, they call them alpha bombers, I think. They were little round balls full of flechettes onto the ground, and the way they went. And when they went home, and that was, by that stage, it was all over. So we spent the rest of the day picking up people and went home. But that encompassed everything to do with the fire force, as we had in Rhodesia. Later on, doing various aspects, sometimes you knock them all over immediately. You don't need the jets. Sometimes you haven't got enough helicopters, whatever it was. But that day we had everything going for us, and it worked out really well. I went back about 6 months later. There was they call him internal affairs area, the chap, and he was actually murdered in a camp, and I had to go and take up trackers to go and so they could follow up on this guy. And while I was there, it was very close. We had this action. One of the other guys told me that there were 13 in that group, and we accounted for 8. And a couple died the next day, and 3 went back to Mozambique. They recuperated, they came back, and they never went to war again. They went sat on top of a hill, and they weren't having anything to do with the war again. Anyway, that was my little, and I just mentioned that because I see stuff written up. Everyone talks about the fire force, but I think it's good to talk about exactly what goes on in the fire force, And I have to talk about my one other exercise. That was my first bush tour. I did a second bush tour in the G-car, and the trooper. The next tour, I went out to the bush in a trooper. But when I got there, I was just on my training on the gunship, and the gunship was there. So it was just myself and my engineer, and we had a gunship and a trooper, and we were just on standby for the fire force, which had moved off somewhere. Anyway, we were having our morning tea. And the army guy came up. Now, there wasn't RLI, and he had a couple of OPs around Motoko. And he said, I don't believe this, but he said, one of my troops has just called up to say that there is a drunk terrorist on top of the Gomo hill, firing here, waving his gun around. Now, that's unheard of. These guys hide during the day. So he said, I'm just telling you that. So I said, well, we haven't fired the gunship. We need to have a bit of practice for both of us, engineer. There was a dam close by. They used to drop a cannon and then fire the thing into the dam. So we got airborne, and we flew out there only about 5 minutes away. And as we arrived, I hadn't even seen anything yet. The guy on the hill, the OP, said to me, he's firing at you. So, then we could see him. So we flew, as soon as we saw him, you could see him holding something up, because at 600 feet, you don't see an awful lot. And I said, take him out. Boom, boom, and then wheel was gone. And then, so there were obviously people around, and I just said to the gunner, just take out all the bushes around the top of this hill. And there was no more noise. So we went back, And we dropped off our gunship, picked up the trooper, and came back and brought trooper out and put them at the bottom of the hill and walked up this hill. And there we picked up the whole lot. We accounted for the whole lot. And yes, and I actually got hit, would you believe? I never got hit any other way, but I got hit by someone who's drunk in the back of the chopper. Not seriously, but I mean, at least I was it. Anyway, that was my time basically on the helicopters on the first time round. Then I went off to be an instructor. Flew a lovely little airplane called a CM SF260. Beautiful little Italian plane, high performance, piston engine, and that's what we did our training on. And it's interesting because at that stage, everyone, as I told you, wants to join the Air Force as a jet fighter pilot. Not our pilots. Our pilots were joining the Air Force, and you know what they wanted to fly? The gunship in the helicopter. Now, when you graded in the Air Force, when you finish your training, you graded fighter pilot, bomber pilot, transport pilot, helicopter pilot. And here we got guys wanting to fly the helicopters because of they, as you can see, the K-car pilot, he controlled the war. Even the jets didn't see what they were shooting at. They just came over and there was no air combat or anything like that. So the guys wanted to fly helicopters. And when I became an instructor on this beautiful little jet, this little piston engine airplane, by that stage I'd done a lot of dogfighting in the Mirage. It took me a long time to get anywhere, but I loved it. It was the best fun, the air combat stuff, and I still do it on my virtual reality here all the time on F-16s. It's just, you're flying by the seat of your pants. It's old Red Baron stuff, even in a Mirage, because you're looking at here for this guy. You don't want to pull too tight because things are going to go wrong with the airplane if you start stalling that type of stuff. And you do all these maneuvers to get behind this guy. It's amazing fun. And that's what I say, I've never stopped doing it. I do it in my virtual reality. But now we got this beautiful little airplane in the Air Force. And I said to a couple of my mates who had been on Mirages, I said, we've got to encourage these guys to become fighter pilots. So what we used to do when we were training is quite often we would get out there and we would dogfight to show these guys how much fun it was. It's quite a long story, but at the end of the day, I met a guy 40 years later. About 40 years later. He was a captain here on Jetstar. And I hadn't known him very well, but he was trained by a friend of mine. And we just got chatting one day, and he said to me, he said, whenever we used to go to the area to go flying, his instructor would say, watch out, Murray's here, so watch our tail, because he's going to come and bounce us. And he said, remarkably, when I finished my flying in Rhodesia, he went and joined the SAAF so he could fly Mirages and jet fighters. So I got one convert anyway out of it, the whole thing. Yeah. So that was did my flying on the, we call it the gem. It was SF260, and then there was for 18 months, and then an opportunity came up to go back to choppers, and I went back as an instructor on choppers. And in between times, I would do bush tours as well, generally on the K-car. But not, we were fairly heavy continuous training at that stage because it was coming towards the end of the war. Things were fairly hot as well. But that was good. That was good fun. And especially, I had a very good boss at the time, and he basically gave me my free hand to train on the choppers. I used to get the blokes solo at base, then go out to the bush to go and do the confined areas, go up to Kariba, up to the Zambezi and fly in the Zambezi. We'd only work during the morning. During the day, we'd go and take the cook. We had the local cook who'd take him to an island in the middle of the Zambezi, catch fish, cook them, and then come back and finish our flying in the afternoon. Mountain flying was amazing in Rhodesia. Beautiful hotels we stayed in. And up in you probably know the Chimani Mountains, beautiful mountains. And for the final cross country, we'd fly along up through the mountains, stay in a hotel. And the manager was a good friend of mine. He always liked us there because to have two armed helicopters sitting on the steps of the hotel kept the bad guys away. So that was really good fun. And now that was about the time independence came, and the guys started leaving the Air Force. And I was actually posted to be a flight commander on the Bell 205, the UH-1H, like the Huey that they had in the American. In fact, ours were from the American Vietnam War. But at the same time, they came and asked me if I'd finish up my last 6 months in the Air Force because I was leaving, if I'd go back and fly the Hunter as an instructor and play flight commander. So I went back. I couldn't pass that up, so I went back as a hunter instructor, and we went and bought some hunters from Kenya. During the war, we had stolen all their spares because every time the spares on their way to Kenya, they'd end up in Rhodesia. So they just dumped them, and the English gave them hawks. So we went up and bought, I believe, 5 of them for 2 million. It's the first time we had a two-seater. So I became the first Rhodesian, well, Zimbabwe instructor because I now had a two-seater to fly. And we brought them down. I was also flying the SE rescue helicopter on the base, and I was still going and helping out with the basic training on the SF-260. So I was still dogfighting on that as well. It was the best last 6 months I could have had in the Air Force. So that was the end of that. And I've been very fortunate in my life. I went straight from the Air Force straight into Air Zimbabwe, and I flew there as an first officer on the Viscount initially, and then the 707 and the 720. And at that stage, we were flying across to Europe, to flying to London, Frankfurt, and Greece. And I'd been in London probably on average once every 3 weeks for 3 days. Greece, we used to go through in the summer. It was wonderful because we'd land in Greece and we had 7 days there. We used to land there, they give us a pile of drachma, and the next day we'd just pile and go off to the Greek island, spend 3 days there windsurfing and eating calamari and drinking whatever they drink. And then we'd come back for a day, go up to Frankfurt and back, and then go back another 3 days. So that was really good fun, and I enjoyed that. But life was getting a bit tough in Rhodesia with Zimbabwe by that stage, with inflation, and the only way I was basically surviving was actually to take back from London and sell it in Zimbabwe to make a bit of money. And that really annoyed me because we knew the politicians were filling the back of the aircraft up with TVs and all sorts of things they could sell with no tax, no import tax. So I was lucky. I was very fortunate. I worked hard and wrote to a lot of different people. But I was taken, and I was really keen to get to Australia. I come in 85, I'd come on a holiday, and I thought I'd come home. And this is, to me, Queensland was like Rhodesia by the sea. Just lovely, friendly people, beautiful weather, and I started applying. The Air Force were quite keen to take me. I went to that interview, but I got a letter to say that I came from a communist country. Yeah, that's what they said. And this is me, Fraser, the bloke, the Liberal Prime Minister, had been Mugabe's greatest champion. Eventually apologized about it. Anyway, that only lasted a short while until the pilots all started leaving the Air Force here to join the airlines, and they took some Zimbabwe guys in. But in the end, it was a good thing because when I got back from that trip, I was offered an interview with Cathay Pacific, which was unusual because they generally only took British and Australian pilots, and I was accepted. And I was older than I'd been writing them for 3 years. And they told me 3 years before that I was too old, but they'd suddenly started increasing their fleet, and they'd got a whole bunch of 747s. So I got the job, and I came across and I trained on the 747, the Jumbo, and it was a great company to work for, Cathay. A really, really good company. I was still keen to come into Australia, so I'd have a home, but they really looked after the guys very well then. I'm not sure about now, but then we were really looked after. I didn't do the long haul very well. It was flying to Vancouver 14 hours this way, coming back 4 hours and 4 days, and then flying off to London in that direction. So, but they did modify that a bit. But because of that, they had an opening on the TriStar, which was a sort of regional flying, and I did another 18 months in the TriStar. And then things happened that I could come to Australia. So I came and joined Qantas. And and that was the best move I ever made because I was the 737, everything Qantas buys is brand new. I'd only ever flown aeroplanes, Cathay, I flew a brand new 747. But in Rhodesia, all our fighters, all the airliners were old aeroplanes. But here, these guys, they just buy new stuff, and it was really good. Really nice guys. And very quickly, I got my command, and I became a training captain. And I think that's a quality that's really good for Australia and Qantas, that they take a foreign pilot, and as soon as after a short while they decide he's going to be good for the job, and they make me a training captain. And I flew the nicest bunch of people, really, really good time. And it never, 7-3 never went more than 5 hours. And that suited me. To go from, the longest trip was from Brisbane to Perth, and that was me. I was happy with that. Most of it was daylight flying, staying in the beautiful hotels around this country. They always provided bicycles and sports equipment wherever we went, always by the beach. So it was really a really good time of flying. However, in the middle of that, actually 5 years after I arrived here, I suddenly, and the blokes all knew what I did. We always talk about our flying and that sort of thing. I mean, pilots get together, they talk about women, and when they're with women, they talk about flying. Don't know why that happens, but anyway. Anyway, in our case, in the cockpit, when you've got 5 hours nothing to do, we always talk about what you did. And I found a thing in my box to say, there's a hunter for sale, and it's 22 hunters for sale. So that was, to me, a joke. How could you go and buy a jet fighter, you know? Anyway, shortly after that, I got another note in my box from a bloke, ex-Rhodesian, who'd been in QANTAS and was in Singapore Airlines. He had bought a hunter, and he knew through background that I was an ex-technician in the Air Force. So he said to me, can't you get a whole bunch of guys to put this airplane together for me? And I said to him, I'm sure I can. You know, the idea was amazing. So I got hold of friends of mine in Brisbane, and when the hunter came, they worked a team together and they started putting it together. And it was actually about the same time, there were single seaters going for sale as well. And I got hold of the guy who was selling them because I couldn't afford the price of and also I didn't want to use the family money, because I know what it's like to have one of these things. You just get a big black hole and you throw money into it, you know. And then anyway, he came up and he said, okay, I'll give you one for sort of half price, but it's one of the last ones, the first one to stop flying. And I'll give you all the bits to make it fly, but you've got to get the money to get it flying. And I was hoping I could piggyback with my mate's two-seater, but that never happened. And about halfway through the time that had been fixed, I just decided I was taking up space in his hangar, and I offered it to a museum. And they kept it in Rhodesian colors. You'll see it in the photographs you got there. And it was on display. And I was really chuffed about that. Anyway, other guys there, the two-seater, it's expensive exercise. He had money, then he had no money, then he had money. It took us 7 years to get it to the flying stage. Now, I hadn't flown a hunt for 20 years by this stage. So anyway, I went to the department here, the civil department, and the guy I dealt with was an ex-Mirage pilot and Phantom pilot. So we were speaking the same page, and he gave me an endorsement straight away. Plus, I was flying the 737, and we got it to the stage where we were going to fly. And that was in July 2003. And my mates, I'm a Christian fella, so I sort of prayed and said, I don't want to crash, I don't want to die, you know. When everything was going fine, I figured it was going to be all right then. But my mate wasn't all that happy at all. He was quite, I said, don't worry about it, it's going to be okay. These are good aeroplanes. Anyway, yeah, it was I tell you what, probably the best days of my life. I tell you, because we got airborne in the shortest runway I'd ever operated a hunter. This is the first time in 20 years. It got airborne halfway down the runway. We flew out over the sea, and I've been speaking to the radar guys before. And when I got over the sea, over the Stradbroke Islands, he said to me, fill your boots, as Ozzy saying, go do what you want. And it was just amazing. I've actually painted some stuff for my children's books. And when I was looking through the mirror, it was long, you could see the beach and everything. And I just thought, this is exactly what I'd hoped I would do one day. Anyway, we went in, and then the next story was we had to land at the Sunshine Coast, and we'd got permission to operate there as long as you didn't make any noise, because this thing makes noise like an F-18. And anyway, I got the position, and when I was speaking to the owner and also the CASA guy, the civil guy, I'd say to him, I haven't flown for 20 years, because what I want to do is do it not a touch and go, because I didn't want the wheels, you can actually scuff the wheels quite badly. I just want to do an approach, go around. And they said, no. I said, no. He said, no, we told the local inhabitants, the houses all around the airport. He said, we told them we're not going to make a noise. So, no. So I said to them, if this is not perfect and I'm coming to land, I'm going around to do it again. And they said, well, they weren't happy about it. Anyway, I came on downwind, and I was coming down, set myself up, set the power that I remembered from years back, and in we came. And when I got to the place to land, it was all in the numbers. And I landed. And parachute worked, everything worked. And then after that, a couple of months later, I did his endorsement for him, and he got to fly it. I've got to go back, and I've missed out a story here, which I don't know why I missed it out. I said I hadn't flown for 20 years. In fact, I left the Air Force 22 years ago. 2 years after I left the Air Force, we suddenly got a call. I was on the squadron. I used to go and help fly train the helicopter pilots, even though I was in QANTAS. I mean, in Air Zimbabwe, they were short of a A2 instructor to do engineer planning. And the boss of the squadron came up to me and said, "Listen, would you like to fly Hunter again?" And I hadn't flown Hunter for a couple of years. And I said, "Yeah, sure." Somalia had been given some Hunters in Somalia. They had changed from being a communist country to a Western country, and the Abu Dhabi had given them their Hunters, but they had no one to fly them. And a young entrepreneur from Kenya had actually said to the general, he was buying lobsters for him, as you do in Africa, and he said, "Is anyone going to fly this Hunter?" He said, "No, we haven't got anyone." He said, "If I can get people to fly them, will you give me a contract?" And that's where we came in. We flew up there, 2 Air Force pilots, all kept it quiet because we came from a communist country, now going to a Western style country, landed there, jumped straight into the Hunter, over my Nike shoes. I still had my helmet, which I brought from the Air Force, and beat the place up. Did another flight with a mate of mine, and the next day we did this fancy air display and gave us a whole bunch of money. And I still got the helmet they gave me as well, a French helmet, and came home. And then 20 years later, this is when I flew in Queensland. And I think I've got the photo of the Hunter. That's it. That's coming in after the first landing. The funny thing about that, now I was 56, the owner was about 58, I think. And we climb out of the cockpit, and there were all these people and TV cameras and everything. Climb out of the cockpit, take our helmets off, and the cameraman comes up and says, I expected to see 2 young Top Guns, not 2 old men." So we put our helmets back on again for the photograph. I haven't got the photograph I might have sent you. Anyway, that was the story of that Hunter. And then with my Hunter, I continued to fly with QANTAS. I started flying a wealthy friend of mine in Tasmania, had helicopters, and I've been flying Bell 47 helicopters. He just said to me, because I work with children, something called STEM. It's science, technology, engineering, mathematics. Australians have really especially on the East Coast, they've really embraced it. So I work with a government agency called the CSIRO, that's the science agency, and I go to schools in Tasmania. I spoke to about 10 schools in Tasmania, and speaking about aviation, trying to get them interested in all those 4 subjects, which aviation encompasses. And my friend there is a developer there. He had these 2 Bell 47s, choppers. He'd say, "Just take them." So I used to go and fly to the school, especially the farm schools. The whole school would come out, and then I'd talk about the flying. So I was flying. Once I retired in 2011, and I continued flying choppers until we moved to Perth. We lived in Tasmania, and the reason we came to Perth is my Hunter, which was in the museum in the East Coast, was in a Navy museum. And when at one stage they got a Navy helicopter, they kicked my Hunter out. Now, in donating that Hunter to the museum, I honestly didn't know that once I donated it, the manager said to me, "Now you go to ATO, and they will give you a tax rebate on your donation. It's called charitable donation." And I thought, okay. So I went to the ATO. I spoke to a guy in the tax office, and he said, "I'll send someone to go and have a look at it." I bought it for 25,000. They valued it at 60,000. So I got a 30,000 rebate on that aircraft that year. So they bought all my furniture in Tasmania. But when they chucked my Hunter out of the museum, I sort of made inquiries about what was going to happen. They said, "Well, yeah, we'll auction it or something." I said, "Well," and I put it in a bid, and they said, "No, we're not going to auction it. We will give it to you." So I said, "That's fantastic." It's a 10, but hang on, it's a 10-ton aircraft. It requires whether VW they call it, those great big things would take. It's basically 2 containers. Anyway, my friend in Tasmania said he would pick it up. Then they said, "No, you can't have it." So now I'm stuck again. And eventually, after 6 years, I went to the minister of arts in Tasmania. And the idea, she runs a museum. Tasmania hasn't got an aviation museum. Every other state's got at least one. And but there was no money. And my mate, my friend with the helicopter, said he would pick it up, but we would know where to put it. So I decided to offer it to Perth, and they were really keen to get it. So, and they paid $50,000 to pick it up and bring it here. Yeah. And if I had still been working, I would have got another tax rebate because I donated it to them, but I wasn't working. But now I'm happy that at least it's been magnificently restored. They've taken basically all the bits and pieces off as if they're going to fly it almost. Painted it up, took all the corrosion out, and the idea being that they never want to have to go back and do anything. They've actually done the same with the Lancaster here in the museum, beautiful museum. And that's where it's sitting at the moment. It's just been painted at the moment. I'm going down to see it again on Saturday. Now, we go back to another story. The hunter that I flew in Queensland 20 years ago, unfortunately, a couple of years later, the guy who owned it fainted. He did the wheels up. He pulled too much G. He explained to me that he pulled too much G in a loop. The wheels wouldn't come down. He had to land on the nose wheel and the wings on the thing. And he changed the wings then. They got really too expensive. Anyway, it sat for a while, and now an English buyer's bought it, and it's been restored. And they've asked me to be involved with the flying. And so, 2 weeks' time, I'm probably going to go. I'm just going to be. I think he just wants me there because I'd flown it before, and perhaps to go to be with the guy. He's got a chief pilot who's going to be flying it, and that's where we sit right now. So it's been a bit of fun. But now my aircraft in the museum in Perth, because it never flew in this country, the Hunter, and this museum will have some association with, to make it sort of appropriate to be in the museum. They're going to put in RAF colours, because the RAF Hunters flew with Australian Sabres in Singapore during the Indonesian uprising or something. And the larrikin Aussies used to get paint kangaroos on the side of their Hunters at night. Probably not very happy about it. Anyway, so they're going to put my Hunter in that colour, in that markings, with a new little kangaroo on the side. But what they've done with mine, for me, they've got my Hunter. And they've made this model for me. It's even got the view, as you could come closer. It's actually got my name on the side here. It's got my helmet with my Mustang on the thing there. And it's a 1970, well, this is 1280. Now, 1280 was the first aeroplane I had with my name on the side. And you've got photographs of that there. In 1976, I was flying choppers at the time. Well, no, I was flying Mirages. A friend of mine, Tudor Thomas, actually got hit by one round, AK-47 round, which affected his hydraulics. Later in the dusk, he came back and put his gear down. So they told him to eject. And he ejected. So now this aeroplane's been resurrected as a model. And mine was in the museum as 1280 as well. And they've got a dedication here, dedicated to the memory of the air crews that perished in the Rhodesian Bush War and to the Hunter 1280 that was lost in that action. Now, when I went and saw the latest manager, he said to me, "We're not all happy about plastic." He said, "We're going to build you a bigger model. And that's going to sit next to my Hunter with this story here. And perhaps, I don't know, perhaps a story about me and my involvement, I guess. But that's nice. So I'm really chuffed about that. And that sits up here in my cupboard, yeah? And that's exactly how I flew it. Later in the war, they took everything off. Because if they shot us down, which happened, they shot one aircraft down, they didn't want the Mozambicans to say, "Look, we shot down a Rhodesian Hunter." They just said there were no markings at all. So this was the last time they had markings on our Hunters. And that's basically where we are now. I think I spoke a little bit about this. I'll just show you my setup here. Let me get my helmet. That's the helmets. And I've got the controls over there. They're Warthog controls, A10 controls, almost identical to the F-16. And that's the aircraft I would love to have flown. The first time I saw one in the photograph was 1974, and I painted it. That's the airplane I wanted to fly. So I've got all Hunters and 737s, and I've got an F-16. I'd love to fly them. And now I'll fly them. It's just the same. It's amazing. I can't believe it. I'm doing circuits. I've got a Sabre. I've got an F-18. MiG-29 and the Mustang. And I do the circuits in the Sabre because that's what it's going to be like in the Hunter when I go and fly it again. And I cannot believe how interesting it is. I did a flight the other day. I think I might have told you. My nephew and his son have got F-16s in Cape Town. So we meet up online and we go flying together. And when we landed, we stopped and we were talking to each other. And if you move your head like this, you can see him moving his head. He's in Cape Town. It was, I just, people mock technology. I think it's fantastic if it's used correctly, I suppose. Anyway, and that's how I keep up my flying, basically, at this stage, Chris. And we're still keen. Now, other thing we talked about as well, when I was trying to raise some money for my plane, my idea, I'm an eternal optimist. So I didn't know how I was going to raise money. I didn't want to use the family money. So what I decided to do, on the recommendation I made my son-in-law, said children's books. So I've had 4 of these published. Is that show up there? Yeah. So this is that's the 3rd one, and they basically sold out. This is some time ago when this is probably the first one. I actually launched it in England, the Hunting the Jet Fighter, at an air show, the 50th anniversary of the Flight of the Hunter, and they've done all right. I mean, they pay for themselves, but you've got to be J.K. Rowling before you start making money to do that. And then COVID came along, and we were stuck in Tasmania. Well, I say we were stuck on the beach in Tasmania, which we didn't affect us at all because we could still walk up and down the beach and all that sort of stuff. And but still, I just put a couple of stories on the SAAF webpage, South African Air Force one, talking about the Mirage. I've been writing stories for my children because they were brought up here, not in Rhodesia or in Africa. And I wanted them to know what it was like. Because if they go back there, especially in Zimbabwe, nothing like the country we grew up in. So I've been writing about that. And I sort of praised a couple, especially the one, I started with the one of my dad. It was his birthday. I think that's what did it. It was his birthday then in 2019. And yeah, 2019. And furthermore, he'd been dead 30 years. But he once said he was so chuffed the fact that I became a pilot because he'd wanted to be a pilot, but he couldn't make it. And after going through this process of engine technician and 3 years and breaking ankles and all sorts of things, I eventually got straight to the Hunter. So he was really chuffed. And he said, he traveled around Rhodesia with a cattle company. And he went to farms to inspect farms for them and that type of thing. And he said, can't you come and visit me on the farm one day in the Hunter? And I said, yeah, sure, I can do that. I'd done it in a Vampire once, and the Vampire just whistled along, no problems. So anyway, I had it photographed with this really fancy camera we had for reconnaissance. And I said to him, yeah, just give me where your farm's going to be. And I'll just say, I went to my task, it was up near Kariba or something. And I came back. And I found the farm, and they could hear me, this, and I ducked down. Anyway, I took the photograph at about 30 meters, 100 feet, because you can see my dad waving. You've probably got the photograph. And his Citroen car, you can see a whole bunch of cattle with their heads down. You can see the Africans watching. You can see the other farmers all watching. You know, at that stage, all I saw was an airplane, nothing else, no noise. Then, so I phoned my dad that night and I said, Dad, you know, how did that go? And I expected all this excitement. Like, oh, no, silence. He said, please don't do that again. He said, we spent the rest of the day picking up fences, chasing cattle, getting the cattle together. And he said, the farmers aren't happy at all. So that was the last time I did that. Although later when I became an instructor, I used to take my students and we'd fly off to the bush and go and have tea with my dad on a farm somewhere. And they loved it. He loved it. It was good fun. But anyway, that story I put in there. And then the guys on the Facebook page, just the SAAF Facebook page, said to me, there was another time as well. I went to South Africa on the Mirages. I met a young Afrikaans guy. And he was from the Bosveld, up near Mafeking somewhere. And we were just talking about where he lived and everything. A young guy, young lieutenant. And he said, I said, up near where? Up northwest. He said, yeah, up in, I forget the name of the area. Anyway. And he said, I said to him, listen, I'm going up there today. I'm doing a low-level navigation on the Mirage. Do you want me to go visit them? And I said, phone me and tell me. And they phoned me straight away and said, yes, you must go visit. So I went up there and I beat the place up. Wow, wow, wow. When I got back, the phone was straight on the phone. And he said, man, they just loved that, you know. Why don't you go up and visit them? So I said, yeah, I'd love to. So I got in my little VW. I picked up his sister in Brits, and she spoke English quite well. When I got to the farm, no English. So I could speak a little bit of Afrikaans because we used to have to fly 1 month in, 1 month out. And and we had the best time. They were just so hospitable, man. Just fantastic. We spent the whole weekend. The 2 young children, the ones teaching me how to speak Afrikaans, and they would try and speak English, and I was trying to speak Afrikaans. Anyway, that was fantastic. I went out again later, which was a bad mistake because they asked me to go and play rugby. Now, I'm 6'2". I normally used to play lock rugby. I hadn't played for years, man, because I had my ankle problems. So I said, sure. Well, that was a bad mistake. He said, you can't play lock, you're too small. You must go and play center. And I got hammered, nicely hammered. And Fastmate Engelsman, he picked me up and get me off again. I took a long time to recover from that, but it was all in good humor. They were just absolutely fantastic. And of course, the SAAF guys loved that. And they said, you've got more stories. And of course, eventually I had 60 stories. And then one of the guys on the Facebook page was an author, Cobus de Villiers. You might remember him. He put the Mirage, the MiG-29 engine in the F1. That was him, Cobus. He's written several books. Anyway, he put me on to his publisher, Mike Malherbe, and his wife, Helene. And this is the result. This is, yeah. And I've actually said in there as well, the big thing that really upsets me, these aircraft, people love their cars and they love their boats and they love their trains and they fix them. That's fine. These poor things, they weigh 10, 20 tons, and they can get airborne and they can fly twice the speed of sound. They're not stuck in there. They are living entities for me. I strap one of those on and now you're alive, man. Let me tell you. Power, everything, And then when they finished them, they dumped them. Even the Israelis. I wrote to the Israelis on their Facebook page. I said, you people, those things won your war for you, and they win wars, these jet fighters, and they just dump them. So I've said to any royalties I make, I will put towards, there's a Mirage, this one's 814, but there's an 815 that's in a museum, in the Swartkops Museum. You want to see it? The numbers, this one's 814. You can see on the tail. And I don't know what's happened to that one, but 815 is in this museum in Swartkops, in an open hangar. They're doing their best to look after it. But the local administration doesn't care. I know from a general friend of mine, Dick Lord, speaking to, Dick Lord, we've spoken about him, speaking to one of the new generals. He said, we don't care about anything before that time. So that's when the people stop looking after us because they get too old, they're going to fall apart. So I said I'll put some, if I make any money out of these books, I will put it towards that. So now the latest one's about to be published. This is the boy jet fighter pilot. This is going to be a series of 4 books at this stage. And the Malherbes are just about to publish it for me. So I've said the same thing there. If they make any money out of this thing, I'll put it towards maintaining. I'd love to get one of those Mirages here because the Australians flew Mirages, but they sold most of them to Pakistan. And only the few that remained are in the museums in the East Coast. There are none here. So even if I could get one and keep it in South African coast, we've got over 500,000 South Africans living here. Oh no, it's not as much as that. There must be about at least 300,000 South Africans. And to be in SAAF colors, it'd be lovely for legacy to go and see them. But I'm not getting much result, not getting much help from that side. Yeah, but anyway, that's where we are now, basically. Yeah, of course. Yeah, that's about my story at this stage, Koos. I've been blessed, Koos. I've never missed a day of work, and I've walked from one job in one day to another job in the second day. And I think about these poor people through COVID one. It's been, I couldn't have, if I'd been able to write the script of what I wanted to do in my life, I couldn't have done better than I've enjoyed it myself. So I'm very blessed.
I suppose it's the joy of flying. That's where it starts with all you pilots. You just want to fly. You don't care what and where and how.
Well, that's I suppose that's why I called it that, because it's not about war stories. There are a couple in there, of course, a couple I've told you myself. But it's just about the fun, I mean, the fun. And I battled, I must admit, because I was very introverted as a boy. And and that wasn't going to work. To be an introvert and trying to get pushes off board to get this sort of thing. So it helped me. My horse did it for me. I've actually put in the back of this book. I bought a wild horse, and I could control it. People used to look at me and think, "How can you control this thing?" You know. And it gave me the confidence to. I suppose at that stage, actually, that's when I really started flying, because I realized I had the confidence to control something wild like that. I could control one of these things. You know, that gave me the confidence. So it actually was good for me as well as a youngster. To develop me as well as a person, I hope. Yeah, and it's still there. I mean, the one thing in the forward of this book I've said there, if you've got children and they want to grow up and be pilots, you've got to tell them they can't do both. You've got to choose one. Yeah. Anyway.
I have a few questions, if you don't mind.
Sure.
I've really enjoyed listening to you here, and I made a whole bunch of notes. So I will have to ask the viewer to forgive me if I jump around a bit, because you know how it is with notes. The first note was when you were talking first, but I grabbed left and right. I recall a dreadful thing happening in Rhodesia when the Viscounts were shot down. Yeah, for those of you who don't know, two of them were shot down with stamps. And I believe people did die, and some of the survivors, and one of them were actually murdered by the terrorist freedom fighter, whatever you want to call them. They were not raped. I have to say that the Rhodesians were very adamant they were not sexually abused. They were just lined up and shot. One of them was a 11-year-old girl, something like that. And from that came the famous Green Leader raid. And it's a funny thing when I recorded the Special Forces guys, the South African ones, they said they were actually lined up to go on that raid, which is something which I never knew. That was news to me. But now I wish to ask you something. When you were flying with Viscounts in 81 or just after the war ended there, was there still a remembrance of that at least, of people still thinking of what happened to the other two?
It's a funny thing, because I guess it's human nature. We were, and I know we were lied to. We were told, and rightly or wrongly, we were told by the Brits that Muzorewa, who was the moderate leader, was going to win the election, and we were told that. And I remember I was flying helicopters in the mountains, doing training on mountain flying, and then the results came out, and Mugabe's won. And I remember phoning my wife and saying, "Listen, you must get everything packed up, because Mugabe had been talking about the day of the long knives, saying that was going to be the end of us." And I know one guy actually stole a helicopter, and he got his farming mates and were going to fly up the country, leading them in the helicopter. So that's how serious we were taking it. And of course, then he had his speech, which was all moderation. It's all going to be okay. Don't worry about it, everything. And human nature, I guess, fifth generation African, you just want to jump at the chance and say, it's all going to be okay. And that's what we did. And I think that's what, if you come back to that, what happened then, that's the story. I think we're trying to make the most of it. Because I'll tell you a story. I flew the chap, one of the pilots was John Hood. He was one of the captains. And his cousin was Robin Hood, who was a pilot with Air Zimbabwe, a very good friend of mine, a really, really lovely guy. And I was flying with him. I was the first officer. He was a captain. And in the 707, and out walked the delegation who were coming in aircraft with us. And it was Joshua Nkoma, who was the leader of the Zipra. And he was the guy who was in charge of those guys who shot him down. And he was walking to the aircraft. And Robin said, "What's this? What's this? What do I do now?" And he said, no, and he didn't. He just said, "What is?" I suppose something like, "What's the world come to?" Here, this guy has given the orders to shoot down my cousin, and here he's coming to my aircraft, and we've got to call him Comrade Nkoma when he give a public address. So I don't know, because I think it's human nature. We just try and make the most of what we've got, I guess, at the end of the day, with the hands we've been dealt.
That is exactly how life is. Yeah, we're chief sponsor here at Legacy. It's an author, George M. James. It's a fake name, pseudonym. He refers to Mugabe, of course, as the baboon Mugabe. And he has a lot of reasons why he's saying it. It's not based on racism, it's something else. It's in the books. But it came out in those books that Mugabe, as a child, became under the influence of a Jesuit, of a Roman Catholic order, the military order called the Jesuit order, the Society of Jesus. And everyone says to me that that actually had quite an influence on Robert Mugabe. And that's why he could be this reasonable man, which has changed. We know what happened in Zimbabwe further. There is no excuse. Let me say to you people here, in case you don't know the history, because you might be looking 10 years from now, the old guys will not be with us anymore. Or perhaps they will. We hope, but perhaps not. But let me tell you, there was something called the Lancaster House Agreement. Now, you can correct me if I'm wrong. And the Lancaster House Agreement gave certain guarantees to the white minority, which they broke.
But only for 10 years, Goose. I think
Yes.
I think it was okay until that agreement. I don't know what the time span was, but once that was over, that's when he went ballistic, I think. Yeah.
Yes, and that's, but then the spirit of the Lancaster House Agreement was broken. I think you can
No,
argue.
definitely.
And this guy was supposed to be a very clever guy. I mean, he had something like 7 degrees. He was a lawyer himself, I believe. Well, he got most of his degrees in jail on the taxpayer, I believe.
Yeah.
But anyway, um, am I right if I say to you that the Hawker Hunter is from the same company which made the Hawker Hurricane for the
Yes.
British?
Let me tell you a
Britain.
story about that because I'm now a proud Australian. um, in the First World War, the chap who built all the airplanes was a guy called Sopwith. He built Sopwith Camel and all these fancy airplanes. Okay, his test pilot was a guy called Harry Hawker. Okay, when the brilliant pilot engineer, when the war ended, Sopwith went bust, his company, because now they got all these airplanes and no one wants to buy airplanes. So what they did is they, between them, started the Hawker Engineering Company. With Hawker's name, I suppose Sopwith didn't want his name there, and Sopwith was the CEO. But it was Hawker Engineering Company, and that's the most successful fighter company in UK ever. And it still makes airplanes. The typing is still of the Hawker factory. And they built the Hawker Hart, the Hawker Hurricane, the Hawker Harrier, the jump jet, the Typhoon, all of them. They built them. And Harry Hawker was an Australian. So I know his grandnephew here. When my hunter's going to come out on display, I've asked the museum if they will come and introduce him and let him open the display because he's direct relative of the most successful fighter company in England, in the UK. So that's interesting. And the Australians don't know that. I'm often speaking to them about it. No, they don't know that. And it's really significant, isn't it? I think. Yeah.
Well, it is.
And
Rhodesia actually sent more men to the Second World War and probably the first one as well, per capita, than any other nation in the empire.
yeah,
And people forget that.
I think I was telling you as well that the story was, in fact, we were prepared for it. The Brits were come and invade us when we declared UDI. And the story goes, and I can't confirm it because I've only heard it sort of secondhand, that the RAF sent a delegation to the headquarters and said, we're not going to go and fly against the Rhodesians. Smith flew Spitfires in the war. That was only, 20 years before that. And he said, we're not going to do that. So what they did do is send a squadron of Gloucester Meteors. It's a fighter bomber type thing to Lusaka. And I suppose they were supposed to intimidate us, I suppose. As it turned out, they took the air traffic control on Rhodesia from Harare or Salisbury. They controlled these Jaguars up in Zambia. So that's how much they were intimidated. We intimidated, yeah.
Wasn't there some kind of an imperial air school or something in Rhodesia as well? Just
Yes,
before the
sure. I mean, that was I forget what they called it, the proper name. They trained pilots in Canada, in Australia, Rhodesia, and somewhere else during the Second World War. And I didn't realize that the biggest contingent came from Rhodesia. In fact, we had a lovely story when I was doing my training as a pilot in this place called Gwillow in Rhodesia. It's a fighter base, and that's where I did my training. And out of the blue came a bloke who came to visit us, and he was Ezra Weissman. He was the chief of the Air Force at the time. He eventually became president, Ezra Weissman. And he came to speak to us because he was trained in Thornhill, where we were based. He'd come out from Israel to come and chat to us. And he actually said at the time when he was chatting to us, if you guys ever come across here, you just make sure you call and I'll have someone come pick you up and show you around. And one of my friends did, Pete Mason. He went there and this colonel came and picked him up. And Pete was, I don't know what he was then. He might have still been in the airline, the first officer. And this colonel came and picked him up, and he wasn't happy about it because who's this guy? But Ezra Weissman had said, and he showed him around. And I suppose to this day, I've not been to Israel, if I go there, I'm going to try it. I'm going to say, listen, Ezra Weissman came and spoke and said, if ever we came here, you come and show us around. I'd love to go and see their setup. Those are the best pilots in the world. I didn't mention that as well when I was in Mirages. And one of the reasons we might not have got the Mirage as well is while I was it was in 74, shortly after the Yom Kippur War, all of a sudden on the squadron a whole bunch of Israeli fighter pilots. And yeah, we didn't know that they and the South Africans were building a nuclear bomb together. Okay, that's another story. Anyway, they got chatting with us, and we were wearing Rhodesian uniforms because we were ostensibly there as the diplomatic corps. We never wore South African uniforms. We did when we flew choppers, but that was something else. But while we were on the 1-2 squadron, we never flew we were in our Rhodesian uniforms. And they said, what are these Rhodesians doing here? They must have said, listen, they're going to take the CZs away from us, because we finished with them. And the story goes that they said, that's your best dogfighter. And it was true. My instructor when I was learning to fly was on the Mirage was an EZ pilot, which was the later one with the extra Doppler and the fuel and the wind. It couldn't, if we would take you from formation, and he'd go full afterburner, and I'd keep up with him. Once we got airborne, I had to come in out of afterburner sometimes because the extra angle of attack with the extra weight and everything, the aircraft didn't perform as well as our aircraft, the CZ. So when we came to do dogfighting, they never stood a chance. It was the best dogfighter. In Air Force terms, quite often, they build an aeroplane and then decide to improve it. And generally what happens, they might put more bombs and everything, but it generally doesn't fly as well as it used to, The original one always flies better. And that's certainly the case with this Mirage. Yeah. And that was another story that was interesting. And that's perhaps they did say they never became cheetahs though. I could understand if they were convert the CZ to cheetahs, but they never could. They converted the EZ to cheetahs, but not the CZ. Cheetah being the Israeli Kafir-looking aircraft that the South Africans built. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating, these things, I believe, and I'm still trying to get the SAAF people to talk to me. This is what we call in Afrikaans a skip.
What's that?
Skimp is where you try to get people to do something, but you don't want to say to them straightforward. So I'm trying to get them to come and tell me, because I know that South African Air Force Mirage pilots flew for the Israeli Air Force. Now, ask me how I know, but I do know. Now, I'm not saying they were not there on holiday. I'm not saying they've even been there after leaving the Air Force, but definitely there was some kind of a thing going on between the two Air Forces, which is fascinating. And I believe it's.
So remember they built the first. Some of the cheetahs were actually Israeli meshes or whatever they are. I've got the book by a chap who wrote Goodman. I don't forget who his name is. He wrote the book on the cheetah. So there was a lot of cooperation. Let me tell you as well. Another time I was on the squadron, and we all came to the squadron. All of us walked in the squadron, and all the guys were in their flying kit. And we thought, that's strange. What had happened, radar had picked up something coming at high speed over Coburg. There's a Coburg which is the one, there's one in the Cape, and there's one up near Hardebeestpoort, down in the nuclear plant. There's one down in
Pilindaba is the one close to Hardebeestpoort Dam. And then you have the nuclear power station down at Cape Town.
Okay.
That's where they make close to
The one,
want to be.
the 1 year hartebeest, this thing came in, went out, gone. The Mirages would have had no chance anyway with the cabin, and no one could tell us what it was. And it probably was this American YF-2A, or the YF-12, what they call it, the SR-71, because that's a reconnaissance. They can do Mach 3. I don't know what that was all about. But there was definitely some funny stuff going on at that stage. But I never remember reading about, I never heard about that. But let me tell you that they flew against the South Africans in their Mirages, and the South Africans did all right. One of our Rhodesians flew against them as well, and he was very good. And he did fine. So that was good to know as well. Even after the war, after the independence, the South African independence, you were telling me as well, that these Sukhois and everything came out and flew against the Cheetah. The Cheetah's small, eh? It's not, it's underpowered because they couldn't get the American engine. And they didn't use that Russian one for some reason. But it's underpowered, but it's really, really good radar and that type of stuff, which they got from the Israelis. So they could look after themselves pretty well, we'll see.
No, they could. There's no doubt. There's no doubt. I know in another book, which was our fellow wrote, Codename Blue Tank, which two things came out. The one was that, and that was the reason why the book was written, is the missile test ranges in South Africa. Well, there's a few. And they look suspiciously exactly like the ones in Israel in the desert. Very suspicious, but this is not an actual range where you drop bombs. This is telemetry. This is maths. So they test these missile things of them, and we know for a fact that these things are being intercepted. I spoke to a SAAF member. He's now in New Zealand. Jacques Tetois, we call him Jacques Tetois. And I'm sad to say, Jacques, cancer is back, and we're praying for cancer. Sorry, we're praying for Jacques as well. He's a young man. He's much younger than us. And Jacques had a fantastic career in the SAAF as well as flight engineer, and then into intelligence. He's photographic type of Jarek. They call it Jarek or something. And he said that they actually found some submarine there just off the coast of one of these test ranges intercepting. And that's the reason well, at that stage, we often didn't know about the Air Force already knowing, but they know that these things are being intercepted. It's interesting, South Africa has changed roles, like Zimbabwe. It is really not a NATO-orientated country in any sense of the word. In fact, it's a BRICS country. So make up your own mind what I mean by that, because I can't say that much on YouTube. Read the damn books. So I say to people, you'll find out things. And they always invite the NATO Air Forces and the Far Eastern ones to come and test their equipment. And what do you think happens to that intercepting telemetry? It goes all the way to Beijing and it goes all the way to Moscow.
Really?
That's what's happening, and that is why they're giving these ranges almost for free. And a lot of things came out there. But what I found most fascinating is that the Cheetahs went up against the American F-15 Strike Eagle, as well as the F-16B model. B for Bravo, not Delta. I want to say that the D model, as you would know, sir, is the ultimate fighter. B was not as advanced, but still, same airframe, very good Belgian. And they won that mock combat. They actually won it. And what's also better is then they sold this Cheetah to some, I think Ecuador or one of these South American countries. And now they're flying Top Gun as the enemy squadrons, as the red squadrons. So they ended up in the US still flying after all these years. Would you believe? But now I want to ask you about the Hunter. There's a story I've heard that there was a Rhodesian pilot, might even be you or a friend of yours, who won a bet that he could hit a drum like a ash. Hey, what do you call
Dustbin.
it? Dustbin, that's it, that's
Dustbin.
right. Dustbin. And he did it at something like 500 knots. He came in low. He fired a few shots, not the entire 9 seconds, just did it, and he hit that thing twice. Is there any truth in this? Is that true?
I don't. It's not all that difficult because if you think about it, you pull the trigger, you're going to put off more than two rounds. As soon as you touch the trigger, you're going to burst of bullets. And the way that we, when we were in the Air Force, we couldn't buy ball ammunition. Ball ammunition is just a hunk of lead. All our ammunition was high velocity, whether it was high explosive. So we didn't actually shoot at targets. All they did was put a big square on the rectangle on the ground, and you fired into that. But you know, if it's a nice day and everything with the gun sight, you hit it every time. You know, you virtually get 100% hits. And so it was a bit of fun, I think. But and then after that, every year they had a competition. They hit this drum again. I think I wasn't around at the time, but yeah, well, it's a good shot for sure. We actually had on when I was on the squadron first time, we had ladders, you know, for because it's always highly competitive in squadron. When I was on the squadron, we only fired rockets, the SNEB rockets, the ones that sit in those pods, and guns. And so we'd have a ladder. Whoever won was winning would go up the ladder, but we also had squash as well. So you'd go out and fire, and you're always trying to get a morning flight. But the best flying was to do a dawn strike. We'd get up there early, take off, and it's calm, especially in winter. It's calm, get airborne, roll onto the target, nothing moves. Everything delta, what they call delta, direct hit every time. So only when it starts bumping around and everything is a bit difficult. So we always try to get the early morning flying to hit the target. But the guns were very accurate.
What are the chances of you shooting yourself down? Because I've heard a story, and you can laugh about this, but some Mirage pilot told me this. When he was quite advanced in drinking at that stage, I don't really believe it. But you know, they were quite vicious drinkers, these people. He says if you come down at a certain angle with an F1, and you start shooting with those 30 millimeters of this, and this thing ricochet up in from the ground or something, you can fly actually into your own
Definitely.
cells. Any
Yeah.
truth of
Well,
that, or was he taking the mickey out of
very
it?
much so. Well, I'll tell you, we used to, because we only had high explosive, most of if you had ball ammunition, which is just the lead, you can actually come down and pull out probably quite low, over 100, 200 feet. We used to have to pull out at 500 feet because of that, because of the shrapnel. Tell you a story. I was doing a strike on a practice strike on a car in the bush, and I was with my friend. I think I was leading. Anyway, I went into this car, fired a rocket, and I could see it was going well onto the target, and I pulled out. And over the top of when I pulled out with full power, I could feel everything was not quite perfect. There was something wrong, but I couldn't tell what it was. There was no vibration or anything. And you know, I called my mate and I said, listen, can you come and fly up next to me and see if there's something wrong with this airplane? Because it's not right. So we sat in formation and I had 200 RPM. Now, the maximum RPM for a hunter is 8,000. And all I had was 200 less than him. No, more than him, sorry. So we came back and he said, what's wrong? I said, I know what's wrong, but don't worry, we're going to be okay. So I landed and the engineers came up and said, how's the aircraft? And I said, you're going to throw your engine away. And they said, what do you mean? What are you going to throw the engine away? They went around and said, you can have a look in the back. And the back was just white. I'd taken a bit of that car well, maybe even put some of my own round into the engine. And it actually nearly rotated over. They might have repaired it. And I'd seen it before when I was a technician, the guys on the range doing that. But it's quite possible. I don't think I can ever remember doing it at night. But at night, apparently, when you go down and fire sometimes, you can see the stuff coming past. Perhaps the smaller bits, but yeah, definitely possible. Definitely.
Well, then I owe this colonel an apology, but I also owe a big thank you to you guys. We spoke here to my friend Skalk Forrie, SW Forrie, one Recce Sergeant Major, and he's one of those who worked with the SAS in Rhodesia, 78, 79, they were there, and they were in Mozambique. And he says, and he's in his book as well, that they were attacking a big base with the SAS, and they had hunter support and all other kinds of support. And apparently, they were a lot more of an enemy than them. He said they were even thinking twice about it, but they did go through the attack and they did overrun them. But then they had to withdraw and they got chased. He said there were even tanks after them. They were running. And they went into it's like a small forest. And there they lied low. And he said, here they come. He says masses of them and they coming. And the next moment the hunters came over and they shot the hell out of him. But he says that brass and things were falling from the hunters right on top of him. That is how close my
Yeah.
hunters were when they were shooting, and you just wanted to
The Doppy,
to me to say to the first Rhodesian fighter pilot I can get hold of, thank you, sir. So I've given the message to you. I don't know if it was you or one of your comrades.
no, it wasn't me. At the time, once again, I was probably on choppers at this stage. But it's something, the things that have been falling, if they fired over the top of them, would have been the Doppies.
Yes, it was the Doppies which were coming out. Yeah,
Yeah,
it was. He said it was
yeah, they're
falling right
very,
over there. He says, but they were
yeah,
so
they're
happy
heavy.
that during that
Let me
running.
show you.
Yeah, show me.
You don't want that thing falling on your head.
Wait, lift it up a bit. Or
Sorry,
bring
there
your
we go.
screen down. Oh, yeah, that's how big it is. Yeah, no,
That's the
that's
Doppy, eh?
substantial, huh?
That's the round itself.
Yeah.
But
And
if
then
that thing falls on your head, it's heavy.
yeah, no,
Yeah,
it's heavy.
it'll break your head. Yeah,
But they were not complaining, I have to say. They were extremely grateful. They say after that strike, they virtually walked out. They says there were no
yeah.
problem running further because they could hear there were a lot of dying and shouting, the normal things which happen. I want to ask you another thing. Would you describe the Hunter as a fighter or a fighter bomber or a strike aircraft or all of it?
It was designed as a fighter, and that's why it's got 4 cannon. And the whole object was that when those new Russian bombers came out, that it could climb up. And I know this is true because I was told by the hunter guys in England. The idea is to fly up to the bomber on its side, fire, and then first you would cut the thing in half. That's what it was designed. So it was designed as a fighter. Okay. Now that was called an F1 or F2. They went up to about a Mark 4, F4. So then they stopped building them. Well, not building them. They went on to an FGA-9. So that's a fighter ground attack 9. So at that stage, the things that we flew were fighter ground attack. They were ground attack aircraft primarily. Okay. So the early ones were designed as fighters. The Lightnings took over from them. And that's where they made the money with the Hunter. They converted all these other aeroplanes that would be Mark 4s, beefed them up with stronger wings, extended their wings, put a bigger engine, and they become a ground attack aircraft. And that's the story of my book, my Anti-the-Jet Fighter. It started its life as a Mark 4. And they were going to scrap most of them. And my Hunter got stuck in a hangar with the engineers practicing on it, the junior engineers. And then they started selling them to Rhodesia, to Kenya, to Singapore, all through the Middle East, Chile, and most of them were Mark 4s. They brought them back from India, from Denmark. There were 2,000 Hunters built, basically. And I think 19 Air Forces. Yeah, 19 Air Forces. So it was a very popular aircraft. And I don't know if you know, they're still flying today. I think I told you. In America, they used them, they bought them initially, ex-Swiss ones, when the Swiss stopped flying them, and they used them as cruise missiles, because they fly about as fast as a cruise missile. So they can use them against ships. It's fast at 620 knots low level. It can easy to maintain, very simple airplane to maintain. And let me see if I've got it here. Yeah, these are the ones still flying in the States. They've got 20 of them, and they're still flying there. They're servicing the engines, everything. That aircraft, 72 years old. Amazing, eh? Yeah.
And they fly at night.
Yeah, it depends on the aircraft. We used to fly at night, and we could do instrument flying, but it's not an all-weather aircraft. It's a basically a day fighter. But I think like the Singaporeans, they increased their capability, their all-weather capability, and they could fly at night, weather and everything. And I think the same with the ones with the Swiss ones.
When you mentioned the Alpha bomb just now, it was a cluster bomb, if I believe correct, something like that. History repeated there. I just want to share this because I have a love of history on the channel is that back in 1943-44, the German High Command, the Nazis, got very anxious because they were intercepting England talking about gas. And so they thought they were talking about gas bombs, like in the First World War. But they then figured out it's just the Americans who arrived and they can't say the word petrol, so they started talking about gas. So that's what they were talking about. It was not gassing people, not at all. Now, I understand Moscow got very, very concerned when the word alpha bomb started coming out. They were thinking in terms of atom bombs.
Oh,
And
oh,
so
really? Oh,
they were a complete diplomatic uproar in the background to find out exactly what is being meant by these bombs which are arriving with the Air Force. It's just strange to me how history always repeats, how you need to understand the locals before you can, I suppose, understand people. And that brings me to my next questions, if you don't mind. I'm really enjoying asking you. Uh, I know that the SAAF air crews were also in Rhodesia. Some of them were flying in South African police force camo uniforms. I don't blame them. I wore it myself with pride. I really like my camos. I got trained by the Rhodesian instructors in counterinsurgency. That's why I like so much speaking to the Rhodesians, because it was one war. Let me just explain to you people again. It might have been a little bit earlier, but South Africa was involved from the beginning until the big betrayal, for which there's no excuse. I don't want to hear anything. So Nationalist Party betrayed Rhodesia, and we're sorry about it, but it wasn't us. It was them. Now, did you know about these SAF crews? Were they like part of you guys, like you were part of second squadron as the Mirages, or were they on their own? Because I do understand that the Rekkies, the South African Special Forces, were operating on their own. They were not integrated in Rhodesian SAS. Uh,
no, the pilots, we just flew with them on the squadron. Most of our choppers were South African at some stage. A lot of the choppers are South African, but they just, I mean, I would have them in my formation. If I was flying KCOG, might be a South African doing exactly the same job. Yeah, with police uniforms. That's all. But they were SAF guys, definitely. And we had the troops as well. I don't know how I remember the police being up in Kariba, but I don't know on the ground what they did. But certainly the pilots, yeah, they were with us and with their own technicians as well. I think.
yeah, I think
Yeah, they
so. I'm
must.
still trying to get hold of them. I know the South African paratroopers were also there, but they're also very quiet about it. I don't know why. The war is over a long time. This is in the books. There's no secrets to betray anymore. So from a
Yeah,
legal viewpoint, really, I just want to mention something just for interest sake. The Rhodesian Light Infantry holds the world record for making the most combat parachute jumps in one day.
is that
There were
right?
some of them who jumped 4 times in one day, combat jumps.
Gee,
On an average, they had dozens of jumps behind them, all combat jumps, all jumping from the Dakota. Just amazing if you think about it. And that's why I want to ask you this. When you know these guys are coming in, I don't know if you have like a mirror in Allo. I can't remember. I of course sat in it. But are you aware of these people behind you, or are you communicating through your flight engineer? Would you call something else? You called the flight engineer, what did you call him on the helicopters?
so basically he's a technician. He could be any trade technician, but I just call him a technician gunner basically because they did the gunnery as well. Yeah, I tell you how good the RLR were. Quite often in the aircraft, well, obviously I've got communications with the gunner, and it's on the same. That's intercom, but we're also on the radio with the guys. Obviously, the other guys in the air and in the OP. We can hear everyone talking. Okay, and I quite often saw the what behind me, the chopper would be the gunner. He had an MAG, a 7.62 machine gun, full of bandoliers and everything. Um, Next to him in the middle was the stick leader. And then next to him was the tech gunner with his 3303, and I had two troops here. So just sitting there with their guns out. But quite often, if you're with an experience, and there was no requirement, but quite often with a good stick leader, I would see him listening to what was going on the ground. And he'd be talking to his mate next to him. He says, "This is where we're going." He would know what was going on. They were very switched on guys, very switched on. We operated with RAR, with territorials and SAS, but none of them, for me, came close to the RLI operating on the edge. And they were just so good, very, very good. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
they were
remember
known as the Saints.
one T-shirt. I operated with one group, and they had a T-shirt that said "100 for none." Just getting back to the SAAF, I just remembered something as well. This is right at the end of the war now. It was been the last Christmas. So that meant it must have been Christmas 79. Yeah. Yeah. When was independence? No, 780. So that was the last year. The war only stopped in April, whatever it was. And I was in a K car, gunship. And at Christmas down, I was instructing at the time, but I was put in the bush for Christmas, and it was down the southwest Rwanda. And my two troopers, helicopters were Pumas. So they were full. They were South African pilots, engineers, and troops. As far as I remember, troops. I can't remember. All I remember two Pumas, and we had no action. It was a real pity because we could have then carried, I think, 8 in each Puma. We could have put a whole bunch of more down than we could in Alouette. But there was no action. But there was, I just can't remember who the troops were. I can't remember.
Yeah, well, Super Pumas were quick. I mean, they're still very quick helicopters. So I wonder how your people arranged the flight times, because the Allo
They just,
taken off a long
and the
time.
gunship went quite fast, actually. You used to always have to slow down for us with the troopers. I think whatever the situation was. No, but they just got to stick with it with the K car, whatever the things. Yeah, that wouldn't be too difficult. The most important thing was we had that many more troops to be able to put in the ground, which was the thing. And remember, I think one of them was shot down as well in down the southeast, yeah, in Mozambique. Yeah.
Yes, I
But
believe it was filled with Rhodesian sappers and explosions, and
was
that
it?
I think one of the Hueys had some kind of a fault and it dropped out, and this thing came into its place. We talk about that, and we're going to talk on legacy with the people who went down to. We found all the bodies, and they found them well kept in the sense that the locals did do the decent things. They did bury them. They
Oh,
did put
really?
stuff on them. Yes, they did. They did very well there.
Oh, really?
Because I think that was one of the first time ever that the Rhodesian forces couldn't remove the bodies of their own. And I know that
Okay.
rankled a lot of people, but no, the local did take care of them. It is, of course, a Catholic country, that part of Mozambique. And I believe it's Puma 634 or something. You know, that's a strange thing about you pilots and people. You don't talk about aircraft like normal people. I saw it with my late wife as well. Always talk about the tail number, as if us normal people should know now what on earth are you talking about. But that's how they talk to them. Um, there's something I want to ask you. When you break the sound barrier, is there any feeling? Is there any bump, or do you not even know that, except for your instruments that you've gone through?
Yeah. Um, no, not really. I did tell you early on when I did that air test, and I went supersonic. All I know is something didn't feel right. Because obviously the sound's all behind you now because you've gone beyond the sound, and that may be a part of it. And something didn't sound that. No, in the Mirage, all that happened because we used to have to go supersonic every time we did instrument flying. You were under the hood and you went supersonic, and when you go into the turn supersonic and the shockwave changes when it slows down, the aircraft pitches a bit, but it's nothing to do. That's to do with the shockwaves. So we went every time we went supersonic, but as you go supersonic, the altimeter drops 800 feet. Obviously, there's a low pressure going over the top of the pitot head. And then once you do supersonic, it comes up again. And the Hunter, the rudder pedals you can feel on the pedals, the rudder pedals just move. And that's sort of transonic at that stage. What we what they used to do, I did it one time, because the Hunter's not really supersonic, it's what they call transonic. But it throws a boom because the wings are supersonic, basically. And if they couldn't get the locals to talk to them about where the bad guys were, they used to say to them, if you don't speak to us now and tell us where they are, Tagati is going to speak to you. And that's where we used to come in, roll up and just dive at the ground. And you get this boom, and then they all started talking, apparently. I just did that once. But I did, one of the hunters we got from Kenya, I was actually running the squadron for a couple of weeks. I was eighth flight commander, the boss might have been away. And we took everything off. We took all the tanks off, we blanked up the gun ports and everything, polished the aircraft up, and went to flying. And then I got up to 1.18, which is now what they call Mach det, which means you've passed everything's gone supersonic. Still in this fairly steep dive now. And but yeah, so but anyway, that's it. By that stage, the aircraft were designed to go sort of supersonic. One of the early aircraft, the prototypes, didn't it looked something like a Hunter? It actually killed, because what happened was in those days, when you went anywhere near the speed of sound, either the whole wing would bend, so the thing would want to go nose down, or the shockwave went in a certain position, which didn't. So guys were trying to pull the stick back, and it was getting worse. And all they should have done probably is just take the throttle. We don't think about that. We're just trying to pull out. And so we lost quite a few early aircraft, probably the early Spitfires and that. But when it came to build the Hunter, I guess they decided the thing's built like a submarine. Because you can jump on that thing anywhere, bobtail boots, you won't get it. It's solid, really solid. And that might have been the sort of the last of the aircraft before they went to the modern honeycomb technology and everything, I suppose. But it's really solid. Mirage is the same thing. Really solid aircraft. The first ones to go through the Mirage were twice the speed of sound.
Yeah. I spoke to a Israeli fighter ace, not not on legacy, but in private. I know a few people. Great admiration, of course, for my wife's people. And he said to me that when they first got the Mirage free from France, or during the design stages, it was not actually armed with cannon. They insisted upon putting cannon in, and that made it into the dogfighter. But he also says to me that he then flew the Phantom, McDonnell Douglas Phantom 2, which I think your friend General Lord also flew.
Yeah.
And he said to me the difference was it's like a flying truck, the Phantom, fantastic thing. But the Mirage was like a sports car. You see, you could throw it. Would that be true? Do you think it's true, what he said to me?
Yeah, well, people always ask me, like an F-15 or all of these big airplanes. Even the Israelis, when they just got the F-15s when they came to South Africa, and they were worried because they reckon even the Arab could hit one of them. Even the enemy could hit one because they're so big. They're huge, man, absolutely huge. And for me, a fighter is something you strap on, and you go flying, and that's why the F-16s are the same thing. You strap it on, and it's power. In fact, you spoke to an Israeli, and I don't know if I can find it quick enough, but I actually, I always wanted to try the F-16, and then I was just listening to an interview by this Israeli. It doesn't matter his name. He got 17 kills in combat in the jets, and most of them on a Nesha or the similar one, the Israeli Mirage. Same as these things, exactly the same as this, the Mirage they built themselves. And then he went on to F-16s. And anyway, he's been interviewed, and it was on the History Channel. And they said to him, which aircraft did you prefer to fly? And he sat back and he said the Mirage. And I was really surprised. All I want to do is fly a fly-by-wire airplane. And he said, and the reason is, I am total control. He says with the fly-by-wire, you just one of the inputs. And that was a big thing for him. Even on the blokes who fly the Airbus, I've never flown an Airbus side stick controller, but they say sometimes you come into land and the airplane's doing its own thing as well, and probably the same as the Mirage, the F-16. You just one of the inputs. And it's designed that way because if you blow off half your wing, the other half of the other half of the airplane can still fly you, But I like that because it made me feel a lot better off that. I've been lucky enough to have flown the best of the best type of thing, But I just like the idea of a fighter being something you strap on, as opposed to play tennis on it.
I want to go on to that. I'm glad you mentioned that. But before I do, I just want to say here that the Rhodesian Armed Forces, when they went to Sandhurst, one of those British academies where they trained officers, they normally always won the Sword of Honor as best student.
Yeah, that's funny. I was watching the chap the other day. I forgot his name again. Jerry Strong. He got it in 1965. And that's amazing. He came out to the bush. He came out from a farm in eastern Rhodesia. He went to the schools there. He goes there, and halfway through the course, one of the drill guys said to him, you're going to win the Sword of Honor if you keep on doing this. And there, I don't know how many people pass out. And yeah, it was amazing. He won the sword. I think that's incredible.
It is damn incredible. It's fantastic, and people should know this. This is why I mentioned it. It's history. It is fact. You can go and see. You will find out those lads, when they went there, they were just brilliant. They were just naturally good. But I understand. This is sad news, sir, but don't know if you're aware of it, but I think a Hawker Hunter crashed at some UK air show not too long ago, and quite a few people sadly died. We feel with them. Is there any stage you as a pilot sitting there where you know you've got to eject or you've got to do something because the airframe is ill? It will not work with you anymore.
Thankfully, thankfully, of course, I've never experienced that. I've flown 23,000 hours, mostly on jets, and I've never had an engine failure, engine fire, or anything. I love jets. Let me tell you a story about that hunter. Excuse me. It was a hunter that I know. You might have heard of Ian Pringle. He flies that yellow hunter in Cape Town. Yeah, he used to be part owner of that aircraft. And I met him once the first time I met him was in London, well, a place called Kemble. And he was taking his wife for a ride in that aircraft. It's an absolutely amazing, beautifully maintained, better than the Air Force aeroplanes, because these guys are volunteers and they keep them polished and they don't. Now, that guy jumped in that aeroplane and he was never going to make that loop. Anyone who watches that, he was too slow. I was speaking to the owner of this hunter that I'm hoping to fly next week or 2 weeks time. He was never going to make it, and he came around and he smacked that road. You know the worst thing about that now, they're trying to have him up for manslaughter. I think they had him on trial, but he might have been acquitted or something like that because he survived that. I don't know how he survived because they hit the ground, kill those people. But what it's done is these airplanes don't fly in England anymore. They're not allowed to. There are no hunters flying in England. And that's why this guy is here with the hunter. Because of that, and then it's never the hunter's fault. Even the one, remember the lightning that crashed that killed the guy in South Africa? That wasn't the airplane's fault. And every crash that you must read the background story. These things are maintained to the highest standard. And you get some bloke with grey hair jumping at, he hasn't flown for 40 years, and he tries to do silly things. I've so many stories, Chris. I feel really strongly about it. I remember once there was an aeroplane that crashed, a thing called a Lightning, a twin boom thing from America. It was worth £2 million, and it crashed in England. And I phoned a lady who runs a warbird company in Melbourne. And I said to her, what was the story there? The pilots were seeing who could do the lowest roll. There's a minimum height. We've got a guy here in Australia, a really rich guy, and he runs a thing called Chamora Museum. They're flying aircraft in Australia. And he's got a couple of Spitfires, which he flies, and he's got a lot of Australian aircraft. I don't know if he runs anymore. But you go to his air shows, they are amazing. Everything is so safe. Everything is done by the book. And that's what you've got to do with these things. But always the airplane gets blamed, and it's not fair, man. Now they can't fly hunters anymore. You know, I went to an air show when I launched my book in 2001 at the 50th anniversary of the first flight of the Hunter. There were 13 private hunters flying. It was amazing to see all these things fly over. Yeah, this is one of them. That one there. It's now flying in America, painted in camouflage because they can't fly it in England anymore. The guy who I'm going to fly the Hunter with, he used to fly that. It's sad, man. Sad. Because people love them, you know. They love the noise and everything. And now you just got these piston things flying around.
I have two questions for you. We've been speaking more than 2 hours now, so this is fantastic. Really grateful to your time.
It's your business. Do whatever you want.
Yeah, no, indeed. The first question I have to you is, and I relate this to my late wife, who was a naval aviator. Do not use the word pilot in front of her. She had this most amazing green eyes, and they would become blue of anger. You don't use that word. It's an insult, which can only be repaid in blood. But she had no sense of humor when it came to pre-flight checks. If you even look at this, you would get obnoxious. Now I need to ask you, what are you people doing there? Smelling fuel, walking around, not kicking tires. You never kicked a tire. I kicked it once and I had to apologize to the air freight. So, is it really that important, sir?
Absolutely. I mean, my wife teases me because when we used to go and fly the helicopter, the bloke who owned it, it's a basic helicopter. It's a lovely helicopter, Bell 47. From the MASH series, it's one of those. He's got two of them, and I always do my checks. Or you don't have to technically with the private aircraft. The actual book says once you know the checks well enough, you can just do in your head. But I didn't, because I used to only fly it once every probably month or so. But I always bring my checkbook out. And he used to tease me, the owner, saying, "Oh, you and your checks." But I used to get my wife, if she's coming flying with me, and she used to read out the pre-flight, the walk around to check everything. And once you get in the cockpit, I always had my knee pad with everything there. If you get it wrong, things don't go well after that. Yeah. And you must remember, if you think about it with an airline, for example, with Qantas, I probably flew on average with the same guy once every 6 months. Now we come together at 1 hour before the flight, and we've got to work everything out, all the fuel, everything sorted out, get to the aircraft and do everything exactly the same as the guy did the day before. Otherwise, it's not going to work, and that's what discipline's all about. And that's why perhaps Qantas has got the safest record in the world. They've never had a jet accident. Well, they're skilled people, let's put it that way.
No,
But I mean, it
fantastic.
goes for everyone. Obviously goes for everyone. People always say to me, "You get in the back of the aircraft, aren't you nervous?" I said, "No. I know how much training those guys have gone through. They've got to go through this amount of training every year, and that's stipulated by the government. So you've just got to have confidence."
Then I have a second question for you, and I ask that of all air crew. What is the story with Ray-Ban sunglasses you people wear even in your bedrooms?
Can I tell you the real story? They're so cool.
I'm laughing so much here in the
I've only
background. I
got
know
10
the
pairs.
real story.
I've only got
But
10 pairs.
no, I think that's part of your, as a lawyer, you put a suit on and you feel quite clever. You're really not, but you feel clever. So I can understand the sunglasses, but I do understand it came from the US Navy for the
I'm
glare.
not sure.
It is actually important.
Well, mine aren't Ray-Ban. I just like the shape of the ones. I don't have reflective ones or anything like that. I actually, I used to get migraines and flying, when I started flying with the airlines, with the Air Force wasn't a problem because you wear those great big visors around there, helicopter and fighter. So I didn't have problems with the glare. It was a problem. When you get above the clouds, it's a big problem. And then I actually got Serengetis, special Serengetis, which went around, and that protected my eyes. So I didn't get the glare that much. So that's a real story, probably.
Well, you were a retired airline captain. And I need to ask you an unfair question, so you can refuse to answer if you wish. But I do understand there are now moves from Boeing, but they only want one pilot in that cockpit. They say the aircraft is advanced enough not to be bothered. How do you feel about that? Because I'm very uncomfortable with that idea.
Yeah, I must admit I'm very uncomfortable as well. But they could have what they say, they have a pilot and a Durban pincher. That might be the way to go. Did you hear about that? Okay. The pilot's there to feed the dog. The dog's there to stop the pilot from touching anything.
Oh, yeah, I remember there was such a joke when the moon landings came and they said they had Chris van der Merwe in one. The instructions to feed the ape was putting the levers.
But Cobus, things have changed. Of course, sorry, things have changed. For example, especially coming to Australia, I came here in 1990, and I was flying the Airbus as a first officer. And well, even when I became a captain of the 737, we just had fun. I mean, the controlling is very good here. But for example, going up to the Gold Coast, we used to make sure we came up and they descended. 320 knots down to 1,500 feet along the beach, and just take the power off and let it slow down. And then as you come to the corner, turn in, and the beach is right close to the runway. And that's what we did. It was fun, and I used to quite enjoy taking off in the morning out of Melbourne, for example. And there's quite often a layer of cloud, and you fly it, and as you get to the cloud, you just tip over, so you're flying just above the cloud, and it's fast, because you're a flat cloud, and the passengers love it. They see the cloud, everything. You can see what speed you travel. But by the time I left, you had to be below 250 knots, below 10,000 feet. You had to be below at certainly 210 knots at 3,000 feet, or whatever it was. Very controlled. And they were encouraging the guys to use the autopilot. And because the autopilot actually flies better, it's especially at high level. You couldn't do it anyway. But at the end, what I used to do, because the autoland in the 737 was still quite old-fashioned. Even on the modern 800 I was flying, we had head-up displays and everything. But you still had to, when you landed in autoland, as it touched, you had to get the reverser going and control the aircraft down the center, that type of stuff. There's quite a lot going on when you land, especially in bad weather. So I used to give, at the end, say we had 3 sectors a day. I'd take one landing, I'd give the first officer a landing, and then I'd give the autopilot a landing, if it was in the right place. So get the practice. And so, and invariably, I remember one time landing, and the 800 wasn't as easy as the early 737s. It was sometimes a bit firm. And I remember landing one place, and then I took over, gave the autopilot, and it just greased it on. And I said, bloody autopilot. And the first officer said, yeah, technology. And so at the end of the day, it's probably a good thing, because it's improved safety, and from that aspect. But once again, I go back to the stage that I flew Mirages, where we flew it like a Red Baron. We only had guns, really, because the missiles were useless, so we would dogfight, These days, you'll never see your opponent, never. You've got to practice the dogfighting, because it keeps the aggressive spirit, and sometimes you get inside the missile range, and you've got a dogfight. But I've read books now of people talking about wars, in combat these days. 80 miles away, you're picking up 6 targets, and you can fire all of them, So that the technology's done amazing stuff. Airlines has made it really safe. In fighters, also really safe, to tell the truth. You very seldom hear of a fighter being crashing or anything like that these days. They're all good autopilots and everything in them, So from that aspect, it's good for the traveling public. For the pilots, not so much. I think my nephew wants to become a pilot. This guy who flies F-16. And I said to him when we landed the other day, after we landed, he was in Cape Town and I was here. And we taxied our F-16s and parked next to each other. And, we just saying how much fun it was, He can fly far better than I can, because he does it all day long. But I said to him, you want to become a pilot, I don't think you're going to have as much fun as that. Because when you go to your ex-wife would have probably told you, before you go flying that thing, you've got about a 3-hour brief or something. Then you do your 2-hour, 1.5 hour, 2-hour flight, you've got another 3-hour brief when you land. You never get to have much fun anymore. It's just work, at the end of the day. But still, you're flying a jet fighter. What more do you want? Yeah. Now, we had the best fun, I think, flying the Hunter and the Mirage.
Yeah, I think your generation, you were still flying seat over pants. Yes, you had your instruments, but you were expected to fly that thing, not to press buttons.
Well, of course, it's actually worked against a couple of guys. These hunters flying in. Now, I'm only speaking out. I might be speaking out of turn, but a couple of them have crashed in America, because if a Mirage, if you pull too hard, I did it once. In fact, I pulled it too hard into a turn, and it went through high speed stall. Now I'm still going fast, but the thing stops flying, and I quickly put it forward again. And it took a long while, but the nose went down, and before we came up again. If you spin it, you're virtually going to have to eject, because it takes so long to recover. Now, that taught me a lesson. Now, if you get into a Mirage 2000, which is fly-by-wire, you can put it up and point to the sky and let go. The computer takes over and it'll recover. And the F-16, all these things will do the same. These guys apparently got the Hunter too slow in the turn, going around to land, and it fell out the sky. So whereas we had to be, you're right by seeing the patch, you had to be careful that you didn't let it bite you. The Hunter did a better turn in a dogfight when you were starting to stall. You'd feel this burble, then it would turn. If you went further, it stopped. and that's what they call a departure. Now you're going to probably try to recover it. So as well as yeah, we had a really good time, but you had everybody you had to watch as well. Not the Hunter so much, but the Mirage.
I spoke to an Israeli C-130 pilot, and she was flying, or she still actually is flying secret missions, you put it like that. And that is her preferred aircraft. She can see
What
nothing
aircraft
wrong
is
with
that?
that aircraft.
What
Sorry?
aircraft, Goose? What aircraft? What
C-130,
aircraft?
the C-130 transport.
I was here. Okay, yes, I'm with you. I'm with you. Yeah.
And then the J model came along, and she wanted to put missiles on it because she said she can, if something comes close, she will shoot it down. Now,
She'd been a good.
when she
She'd have been a
graduated,
good.
they all thought she was going to go to the F-15s, but she wouldn't. She loved this thing. She loved it like no
Really?
person I've ever seen somebody like that. She gets violent if you insult the aircraft. I told her it's a flying barn and things that started, well, very bad for me. But anyway, to make a long story short, she then said to me that the Brits, the Royal Air Force, had a submarine hunter called the Nimrod.
Yeah.
And this Nimrod actually, would you believe, had on its wingtips, or somewhere on its wings, it was designed to carry air-to-air missiles, which is the only big aircraft I know about which can do that. My question to you is, as a fighter pilot, would the theory actually work that you would not expect a big aircraft like that to be able to launch at you? And perhaps, but that's a theory. She says if I can get them close enough to see who she is, she will launch and she will shoot them down. Well, what do you think of that, sir?
Definitely. Especially Israelis. They're the ones who designed this helmet thing. So, for example, in a Mirage, I was flying the early Sidewinders, you had to get behind the guy and pointing at his engine before the thing would growl at you, and then you fire it off. So you have to be behind him. We had radar missiles, but I don't think they would ever have worked because that was in the early 70s. But these things now, you see those big helmets they got. Wherever they're looking, their missiles looking at the same spot, eh? So if the ship came anywhere around here, she could look there, fire it, as far as I know, and just it would take him out. I just don't know. They'd have to come in really close. I don't know what the capabilities of their radar would be, because that's the big thing. These days with these fighters, it's a radar that picks the aircraft up, and then you've got the missiles that go after it. But if and that might be the case, you've got a great big Hercules. There's no reason why you couldn't put a decent radar on there and pick it up, type of thing. But I suppose they're hoping they'd have some sort of fighter escort, perhaps. But there's no reason why not. Absolutely.
Yeah, you see the way where she flies, I don't want to say too much about this. The way she flies, she figures that they will have to come to do a visual. They won't just shoot it down from extended range. And her theory is if she can only get those missiles, and up to now she couldn't. Very angry about it. But she says then she will be able to defend herself at least, which is an interesting theory. I don't know. Might be like that, might not. But can I ask you, which is the easiest commercial airliners to fly? The Boeings or the Airbus? Or that other
You
one,
know,
TriStar, what's that big one? The wide body one?
yeah, the A380. I think you're getting argued from both sides. I think so. I like Boeing. I only ever flew Boeing. I flew Airbus, but the Airbus I flew had a stick. Um, my own theory is the Airbus have got the side stick controller because they want to put a cap on that, so you won't be able to touch it. It'll be for emergency use only, you know. But I think you can get argument from both sides. I hear arguments from both sides of the aircraft that they like. They're so well built these days, Chris, that you can't pick and choose. I don't think. The biggest thing about for me, like one of my, I did his command training. He's a captain now on the 787. The guy's flying up to 20 hours, 20 hours on one leg, from Perth here to London. And they're going to go, they've got this A350 now, the Airbus one. That's going to go from Sydney to London. That'll be over 20 hours. And I could never sleep on the airplane. We just sat in first class seats in 707 in Cathay on the jumbo. They were like coffins. I assume these days they're better, because you're not flying, you need to be rested. but you never really get a good sleep on that thing. And yeah, that wouldn't be an appeal to me at all at this stage. But once again, you know, it's a job. They don't, I don't relatively, they don't get paid as well as we were years back, because everyone seems to want to be a pilot now, and the prices have reduced, but people still love to fly, so that's good. As long as they keep on doing that, we're okay. But I honestly don't think there's much to pick between them. I don't think so. Even the seven, like I'm talking about the Airbus being fly-by-wire. Having said that, it's a different type of training now. Because when we learn to fly in the airlines, if something went wrong with the aircraft, the first thing you do is take the autopilot out, and then you fly to something. Now you know it's connected by rods and to hydraulics to the back. We had an incident here, I don't know who it was. But what happened was the aircraft started doing something silly. So what the pilot did, the flying pilot took the autopilot out. But in fact, you haven't taken the autopilot out. You're still an autopilot. All that happens when you take off and you press that button there, you've given control of the aircraft to the panel, which is saying, you go on this GPS, climb to that height, level off, all that sort of stuff. Okay, so that all that's happened is that the panel is now driving the aircraft. But it's still an autopilot. So when you decide you want to fly yourself, you take the autopilot out. All you're taking away is that panel. You're still an autopilot. Whatever you do here, it'll do what you want to do within its limits, but you're still an autopilot. So what this guy did by taking it out there, or taking the autopilot, that's out of it out, its aircraft didn't recover. So the first thing he should have done, which is not new technology, is say to the first officer, you have control. So he puts his autopilot, and everything's in triplicate anyway. So it's not looking at his side at all. And the aircraft would have recovered straight away because they don't speak to each other at all. So that's just a different technology. And it probably takes half an hour to learn that, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard some pilots say to me that the Boeing, what do you call it, the stick, the thing you control it with, will start shuddering or something happens to it if you come to stall speed. While the Airbus with that little remote thingy of its doesn't, which to me is a bit dangerous. I mean, I would prefer the pilot to actually know there's something wrong with his aircraft.
Yeah, perhaps that's early days. I would say now they're probably all pretty similar, because for safety's sake. They've lost, I know they lost one Airbus, but a long time ago, because of that. It's called a zero alpha floor, I think. And the aircraft did something silly when it reached there. But probably once again through training. I remember I felt sorry for an Indian pilot. He crashed his Airbus, and it was to do with the Airbus technology. And they blamed him for being a bad pilot and this sort of stuff. And I felt sorry for him, because I think when the Airbus first came out with this new fly-by-wire, there should have been extra training done with the Airbus because of the differences. Now it's probably down the chain. Everyone flies both of them, but that was something I felt sorry for him.
I think we can talk for another 3-4 hours, but my wife is gonna get very obnoxious. I sent her out to get some nails done and a massage and things, but I think she's waiting here outside the door in the hotel room. So I have to ask you the last question here, Steve. Where can we get hold of your books? If people want to buy them, support, your charity or your efforts, I will put the links in as well, of course.
Sorry, these ones have sold out, basically. What I'm going to try and do, Chris, is once I've got this other one on the go, I'm going to put them back on and I'm going to self-publish them, because they're too expensive for the guy in South Africa to do. So that one's out of the way. This one, it's just the joy of flying, and it's on Amazon by Steve Murray. I'm going to buy my own ones. So it's Joy of Flying, Steve Murray on Amazon. It'll come up straight away. Yeah, and they're in hardback, softback, and Kindle. So I appreciate that. That's great. Thank you. And when the new one comes out, perhaps I can get hold of you to, if you can do that as well, that'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I always say to people, we don't say these things without reason. We expect you to go and buy the books. It's for a good cause. You will learn something. You will learn something. But I have to say to all of you, I really enjoyed this. I really enjoyed speaking to you. If you have questions for Stephen, please leave him here. We will bring him back. I promise you, at some stage he will be back. Because I've got hundreds more of questions here, actually. I mean, I really enjoyed this. And for you who's listening here and you think to yourself, man, I wasn't a fighter pilot. I don't know if I have a story. Listen to me. You have a story. Please come and tell us. Just this year,
Yeah,
or last year, I've lost 8 members of 32 Battalion who I couldn't report due to death.
really?
I lost some people from the Bushman Battalion. And just this very week on Tuesday, we buried something from Twee Regiment Noord-Transvaal, 2nd Regiment Noord-Transvaal Commando, because we had the youngest RSM ever, 21 years old, would you believe, on to tell us about his life. And he said to me, Chris, sorry, I have to do a funeral. So I want to tell of all of you guys, please come and talk to me. I don't care if you were in the Rhodesian forces or your South African forces. You're more than welcome here. We're interested in you. We want to hear your story. We want to get the legacy out there, the history. Please contact me. Don't hesitate. Don't think you don't have a story. Then you normally have a damn good story. But even if you think you don't have a story, I'm telling you, you've got a story, because
Totally
the
agree.
history books will absolutely never take these small things together. They will
True.
tell you about the big generals and the admirals and the big operations. But this is a human story, isn't it? So thank you for that. I appreciate your time. Thank you for your wife that we could use a Zoom. We're really grateful. And we're looking forward to speak to you again. And for the rest of you, until we meet again, God bless you all.
Okay, well, thanks, Groves. Groves, I really appreciate chatting to you as well. It was interesting that the other day, and I would encourage everyone to do the same as you're doing as well. I was chatting to a guy who communicates with me quite a bit, and he's friends with a friend of mine in Irene. Do you know Irene very well? Irene? Irene in South
Hello,
Pretoria?
Irene. Yes, I had a girlfriend many years ago in Pretoria.
Well,
Irene, it's a suburb.
I'm I'm very friendly with the Vanderbilt who on the farm there. I used to go and keep my horses there, and I got to know. And I was communicating with someone who knows Adrian, who's a good friend of mine, who's a young Vanderbilt, and it was Philip Bayers. Have you heard of Philip Bayers? He's Smuts' grandson, and he'd be a good guy to chat with. He's got a couple of his speeches he sent me. Smuts was an amazing guy. Eh? Oh, yeah. So anyway,
Yeah,
but
no,
he
we
was,
were. There's a very rich history. I mean, if you think about Sailor Malan flying in the Battle
yeah,
of Britain, I think he was a top ace. Um, Dick Lord, your friend, General Lord,
yeah,
started as Top Gun. Well, he was part
yeah.
of it. Let me not say start, but he was
But
certainly part of the
yeah,
Top Gun while he was flying for Royal Navy.
yeah.
Phantoms, things like that. We had fantastic pilots in out of Africa. You know, it's a funny thing. So I sometimes say to people, even in my books, I say, what will you do if I tell you there was an Air Force in Africa with better turnaround times than the Israeli one? Actually, there were two of them. And they look at me and say, nah, it's not possible, mate. So go and look at the Rhodesian Air Force. Go and look at the South African Air Force. You might learn something. And there's a lack of knowledge out there, and it's our own fault. We need to speak up. We need to come and talk. All the people are welcome here, especially, it's really a bit strange to me to actually talk to a pilot. We got Fosse, our flight engineer, who normally talks to the pilots because he understands you people. Even though he does say something strange, he does say a fighter pilot is something which wastes fuel or something if you don't hover, and to hover is magic. They have all these strange things which I don't understand. All I
They're
know
all
is
jealous. They're jealous of us.
you say, well, hello guys are jealous of you. You see, that is why the Air Force should talk to each other. But thank you so much, Steve. We really appreciate your time here. And really, guys, we mean it. If we say to you, come and talk to us, please
I
come and
will.
talk to us. Don't waste time. Come and talk to us. You're always welcome here, and you're always welcome to come back.
And if I fly that hunter, I'll contact you and talk about it.
Thank you.
75 years old and still going, Chris.
Well, they say there's no such thing as an old and a bold pilot, but it seems to me you're the exception.
That's all good. Nice chatting, Chris. All the best, eh?